Your interpreter is hiding the truth. Daniel Whitmore's hand froze above the contract. The gold pen hovered midair. For a moment, he thought he had misheard because nothing in that room suggested the possibility of interruption, least of all from a child. "What did you say?" he asked slowly. Annie stood beside him, small fingers wrapped around a chilled bottle of mineral water. Her heart was pounding so loudly she wondered if everyone could hear it. "The interpreter," she repeated. "He's hiding something." Daniel's expression shifted, first confusion, then disbelief, then something sharper. He turned his head. Across the table, Marcus Klein's face had gone pale. Not annoyed, not amused. Pale. A faint line of sweat formed near his temple. His hand slid instinctively over the German language contract, as if to protect it. Daniel noticed. "What is she talking about?" Daniel asked without looking away from Marcus. Marcus forced a tight smile. "Sir, she's mistaken. She's a child." Annie shook her head quickly. "I heard you," she said. Loretta Johnson, Annie's grandmother, stepped forward from the doorway, panic in her voice. "Sir, please forgive her. She shouldn't be in here." Daniel lifted his hand gently. "Let her finish." The executives shifted uneasily. The German delegation exchanged guarded looks. Annie swallowed. "I went to the bathroom," she began. "The one near the hallway. I couldn't find Grandma." Her voice trembled, but she kept going. "When I came out, he wasn't inside the bathroom." She pointed directly at Marcus. "He was by the corner, near the supply closet." Marcus stiffened. "There was another man there," Annie continued. "The one who works with you." She pointed now toward Ethan Cole, Daniel's executive assistant. Ethan's jaw tightened. Daniel's gaze shifted slowly in that direction. "He gave him papers," Annie said. "Not the big one on the table. A different one." "What papers?" Daniel asked. "A file," Annie answered. "It was in German. I saw the letters. They looked like the ones on the contract." Marcus's lips parted slightly. Annie took a breath. "He said you don't read German. He said he would handle the wording." Silence crashed down over the room. Daniel's eyes moved back to Marcus. "You told someone I don't read German?" Daniel asked evenly. Marcus straightened. "Sir, this is absurd. Children overhear fragments and..." Before he could finish, another voice spoke. "Sir, I heard it too." All heads turned. It was one of the restaurant servers, a young woman in a black uniform, standing near the back wall. Her name tag read Camila. She looked terrified, but determined. "I was refilling water in the hallway," Camila said. "Mr. Klein and Mr. Cole were speaking near the restroom. I wasn't trying to listen, but I heard him say, 'He won't know the difference. He doesn't read German.'" Ethan stood abruptly. "This is inappropriate. We are in the middle of a corporate negotiation." Daniel did not raise his voice. "Sit down." Ethan hesitated, then sat. Daniel turned back to Annie. "What else did you see?" he asked. Annie's small hands tightened around the bottle. "The papers," she said. "They were clipped together. The top page had numbers on it, big ones. And he said the English version would look different." Marcus's composure fractured. "Sir," he said, voice strained now. "This is being taken out of context." Daniel picked up the German contract from the table. "Klaus," he said, addressing the German lead negotiator, "please read Section 9 aloud." In German, Marcus leaned forward quickly. "There is no need. I didn't ask you." Klaus began reading. The German words filled the room. Marcus translated. Daniel listened carefully. But now, doubt had entered the room like smoke. He pressed a button on his phone. "Rebecca," he said when his general counsel answered, "I need a live translation of Section 9, right now." The German text continued. Rebecca's voice followed. The room stiffened. The equity percentage in the German document did not match the English summary Marcus had provided earlier. 40% lower valuation. A clause transferring voting control after 18 months. The air felt thin. Daniel placed the pen down with deliberate calm. He looked at Marcus. "You will step outside." Marcus's face had completely drained of color now. "Mr. Whitmore." Outside. Security appeared at the door. Marcus walked out under their watch. The door closed with a muted click. Daniel turned slowly toward Ethan. "We will discuss your involvement," he said quietly. Then he stood and walked around the table until he was in front of Annie. She looked smaller now that the confrontation had exploded. Loretta stood trembling behind her. Daniel lowered himself to one knee. "Why did you tell me?" he asked softly. Annie blinked. "Because it was wrong," she said. "And Grandma says if you see wrong and stay quiet, you become part of it." The executives shifted in their chairs. Camila exhaled slowly at the back of the room. Daniel studied Annie's face, the seriousness there, the absence of calculation. In a room filled with men who negotiated for a living, the only person who had nothing to gain had told the truth. He nodded once. "Thank you, Annie." Outside the glass walls, Atlanta glittered beneath the night sky. Inside, $1 million lie had just been stopped because a 6-year-old girl walked out of a restroom and refused to ignore what she heard. Daniel Whitmore did not raise his voice. He did not slam his hand against the table. He did not curse. Men who had worked with him for years knew that silence from Daniel was far more dangerous than shouting. "Rebecca," he said into the speakerphone, his tone even, "stay on the line. I want you to compare the German master copy with the English summary Mr. Klein prepared last Thursday, line by line." A faint pause on the other end. "Understood," Rebecca Sloan replied. Papers shuffled. Keys clicked. Across the table, Klaus Reinhardt removed his glasses and wiped them slowly with a linen handkerchief. The other German executives whispered among themselves, their earlier confidence replaced by visible unease. Ethan Cole sat rigid, hands clasped tightly in front of him. His expression attempted neutrality, but a muscle near his jaw twitched every few seconds. Loretta stepped forward and gently placed her hand on Annie's shoulder. "Come here, baby," she whispered. Annie hesitated. Daniel noticed. "It's all right," he said quietly. "She can stay." Loretta searched his face for mockery and found none, only seriousness. She remained beside her granddaughter but did not pull her away. Rebecca's voice returned through the phone. Section 9, Subsection B, Valuation Adjustment Clause. The German document reflects a 40% reduction tied to deferred governance rights. The English summary provided by Mr. Epsident. Klein states only a temporary advisory restructuring with no financial impact. The room chilled. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. 40%. That was not an error. That was theft. "Klaus," Daniel said, opening his eyes again. "Was this adjustment discussed in prior drafts?" Klaus shook his head slowly. "No, Mr. Whitmore. This clause was introduced in the final German revision. Your team approved." Daniel's gaze moved to Ethan. "Approved by whom?" Daniel asked. Ethan inhaled slowly. "The documents passed through standard internal review. By you." "Yes. And you do not read German either." Ethan hesitated. "No." Daniel nodded once. "So you relied entirely on Mr. Klein's translation?" "Yes." The silence grew heavier. Annie looked up at her grandmother. "Grandma," she whispered. "Are we in trouble?" Loretta swallowed. "No, baby," she said softly. "We're not." Daniel heard that. Something tightened in his chest. He remembered his own mother once asking if they were in trouble when the power company threatened disconnection. He remembered being too young to understand contracts but old enough to understand fear. If this moment touched something in your heart, don't just scroll away. Like this video to support stories that stand for truth and quiet courage. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. I would truly love to see how far this message travels. And subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story where justice finds its way, even in the most unexpected moments. He stood slowly. "Ethan," Daniel said, "step outside." Ethan's composure cracked. "Sir, I've been with you for 6 years, and if you're innocent, you'll have the chance to prove it." Security returned. Ethan stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out without another word. The door closed again. Daniel exhaled through his nose. "Rebecca," he said into the phone. "Freeze all transaction authorizations related to this deal. Notify compliance. I want a full forensic review of the last 30 days of document revisions." "Yes, Daniel." He ended the call. Then he turned to the German delegation. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "we will adjourn for the evening. My office will contact you within 48 hours to reschedule negotiations under revised review procedures." Klaus nodded. "We appreciate your diligence." The Germans gathered their materials quietly and exited under staff guidance. Within minutes, the grand private suite so recently full of authority and arrogance felt hollow. Only Daniel, Annie, Loretta, and Camila remained. Camila shifted nervously. "Sir, I didn't mean to interfere." "You didn't," Daniel interrupted gently. "You told the truth." Camila exhaled in relief. Loretta cleared her throat. "Mr. Whitmore, I am deeply sorry for the disruption." Daniel looked at her properly now. "How long have you worked here, Mrs. Johnson?" 23 years. "Have you ever caused a disruption?" "No, sir." He nodded. "Then tonight wasn't a disruption." He turned to Annie again. You went into the restroom by yourself? Yes, sir. And you understood what you heard? I didn't understand all of it, Annie admitted, but I knew it wasn't honest. Daniel felt a faint, reluctant smile touch his mouth. Honesty, he said quietly, is rarer than intelligence. Loretta squeezed Annie's shoulder. We teach what we can, she said. Daniel walked toward the window. Atlanta stretched beneath them. Glass towers, highway ribbons, red brake lights blinking like distant warnings. He spoke without turning around. When I was 25, he said, I trusted a partner who altered supplier contracts without telling me. Nearly destroyed everything I built. He paused. I told myself I'd never miss that kind of sign again. He turned back toward them, and tonight, I almost did. Annie tilted her head. Because you trusted him? Yes. Grandma says trusting people is good, but checking is smart. Daniel laughed softly under his breath. She's right. He stepped closer again and crouched slightly so he wasn't towering over Annie. You may have saved my company tonight. Annie's eyes widened. I just told what I heard. That's often enough. Loretta cleared her throat again, cautious. Sir, about my job, you're not losing it. The relief that crossed her face was quiet but profound. And Annie, Daniel added, I'd like you to come by my office tomorrow. With your grandmother, Annie blinked. Am I in trouble? No, Daniel said. Not even close. He stood fully now, his posture returning to its usual controlled composure. But something had shifted, trust had cracked, and the investigation had just begun. Outside the window, the city moved forward without knowing a corporate betrayal had been halted by a child. Inside, Daniel Whitmore made a silent decision. If there was rot inside his company, he would find it, no matter how deep it ran. The Fulton Tower restaurant looked different after midnight. The chandeliers were dimmed. The jazz trio had packed up their instruments. The city beyond the glass walls still shimmered, but inside, the illusion of glamour had been replaced by fluorescent light and procedural seriousness. Daniel Whitmore stood in the small security office behind the kitchen corridor. Jacket off, sleeves rolled up. He had not left. On the wall, 6 surveillance monitors flickered with black and white angles of hallways, elevators, private entrances, and service corridors. Beside him stood Marcus Reed, head of internal security, a former Atlanta police detective with 28 years on the force and a reputation for not missing details. You said restroom hallway, Marcus said, rewinding the footage. Yes, Daniel replied. Approximately 8:47 p.m. Marcus adjusted the timeline. The grainy image stabilized. There was Marcus Klein stepping into frame. He did not enter the restroom. He paused, looked over his shoulder. Then Ethan Cole stepped into view from the opposite direction. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. Marcus zoomed slightly. Ethan handed Marcus a thin document folder. Marcus opened it briefly. They spoke. There was no audio. But intent does not require sound. Marcus pointed toward the private dining room. Ethan nodded. The exchange lasted less than 90 seconds. Then Marcus walked back toward the meeting suite. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Well, he muttered quietly. That's not a bathroom break. Daniel folded his arms. He did not speak immediately. He watched the footage play once more. Trust. He had trusted Ethan with access to draft agreements, investor calls, even early-stage product designs. 6 years. Marcus glanced sideways at him. You want me to call it in? Marcus asked. Not yet. Daniel's voice was calm again. I want to understand scope first. Marcus nodded. Financial Crimes Unit can step in quick. They will, Daniel replied. But carefully. He turned away from the monitors and looked through the small security office window into the dim corridor. I built this company because I was tired of being told I didn't belong in rooms like that, he said quietly. Marcus didn't respond. He knew better than to interrupt when a man like Daniel was thinking out loud. I was 22, Daniel continued. First investor meeting. They asked if my father owned the company. Marcus let out a low breath. Let me guess, he didn't. He was a mechanic, Daniel said. Still is. Silence settled between them. Daniel straightened. Pull email logs from Ethan's work account. Last 30 days. Cross-reference with Marcus. Marcus gave a short nod. Already started. Good, Daniel thought. He left the security office and walked back toward the now empty private suite. The table still held the unsigned contract. The pen lay exactly where he had placed it. He picked it up and turned it slowly between his fingers. 40% undervaluation. It wasn't just greed. It was coordinated. He thought of Annie, a 6-year-old who didn't understand equity percentages but understood dishonesty. He thought of Loretta's fear losing her job because truth had spoken too loudly. Daniel had spent years speaking about corporate integrity at conferences, but integrity is easy when no one is testing it. He pulled out his phone and dialed Rebecca again. "Send HR termination notices for Marcus and Ethan," he said. "Effective immediately. Freeze severance, pending investigation." "Understood," Rebecca replied. "And notify legal to prepare documentation for federal inquiry." A pause. "You believe it goes that far?" "Yes." He ended the call. Then he did something unexpected. He walked down the employee corridor to the service break room. Loretta was sitting at the small laminate table, Annie beside her, a paper cup of hot chocolate in her hands. Camila sat nearby, still shaken but calmer now. All three looked up when Daniel entered. Loretta stood quickly. "Sir, please," Daniel said gently. "Sit." He pulled out a chair across from Annie. The break room smelled faintly of coffee and lemon disinfectant. Not polished walnut, not imported wine. Real work happened here. "I reviewed the camera footage," Daniel said plainly. Annie's eyes widened slightly. "You were right." Loretta closed her eyes briefly, whispering a quiet thank you under her breath. Camila exhaled audibly. Daniel leaned his forearms on the table. "I want you both to understand something," he said to Loretta and Annie. "What happened tonight matters." Loretta nodded slowly. "It matters because corruption doesn't always look loud," Daniel continued. "Sometimes it wears a suit. Sometimes it smiles." Annie listened carefully. "Are they going to jail?" she asked. Daniel almost smiled. "That depends on what the investigation finds." Annie nodded solemnly, as if that answer made complete sense. Loretta looked at Daniel carefully. "Sir, if this gets messy, I don't want my granddaughter dragged into headlines." "She won't be," Daniel said firmly. "Her name stays out of it." He paused. "And I meant what I said earlier. I'd like you both to come to my office tomorrow afternoon." Loretta's brows knit slightly. "For what purpose?" Daniel looked at Annie. "For a conversation." Annie tilted her head. "Am I in trouble?" "No," Daniel said softly. "You may have just changed the direction of my company." The break room fell quiet. Outside the narrow window, Atlanta traffic hummed steadily into the night. Daniel stood. "I'll have someone arrange transportation for you tomorrow," he added. Loretta nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir." As Daniel walked back toward the elevator, he felt something settle into place. Betrayal had entered his company, but so had courage. And sometimes, he thought, courage arrives in the smallest package possible. By the time Loretta Mae Johnson guided Annie out of the Fulton Towers service entrance, the air had turned damp and cool. The kind of Atlanta night that settled into your bones without ever becoming true cold. The city didn't look like it had changed. Downtown lights still blinked. A late-night MARTA train rattled somewhere in the distance. A siren wailed briefly, and then faded, as if even danger had a schedule and places to be. But Loretta's hands shook on the handle of her janitorial cart. "Grandma," Annie said softly, matching her footsteps to Loretta's shorter stride. "Did I do something bad?" Loretta stopped beside the concrete wall and crouched until her knees complained. She placed both hands gently on Annie's shoulders and looked straight into her granddaughter's face. "No, baby," she said, steadying her voice the way she'd learned to do decades ago, when fear had to be packed away like winter coats in Georgia. "You told the truth." Annie blinked, but everybody looked mad. "Some people look mad when they get caught," Loretta said. Then she softened, brushing a loose braid away from Annie's forehead. "And some people look mad because they're scared. That don't mean you did wrong." Annie nodded as if she understood, though her lips tightened the way they did when she was working through a new math problem. The parking deck smelled of oil and rain. Loretta's old Buick sat under a flickering light, paint dull, bumper dented, faithful in the way a hard life required things to be. She loaded her cleaning supplies into the trunk and settled Annie into the back seat with the booster cushion Loretta kept, even when Annie protested she was too big for it. "Seatbelt," Loretta said automatically. Annie clicked it into place. Loretta slid behind the wheel and exhaled. Her hands stayed on the steering wheel for a moment longer than necessary. She didn't start the engine right away. The truth was, she wanted the night to pause, because the moment she drove away, the world would catch up. Calls would come, managers would talk, rumors would spread through the staff like grease fire smoke fast, dirty, impossible to fully contain. And Annie, sweet Annie, had walked right into the middle of it. Loretta started the car. The radio came to life on an old R&B station, something slow and familiar, a voice from the past singing about heartbreak and grace. Loretta turned it down to a low hum. They rode in silence for a few blocks. Loretta kept her eyes on the road, but her mind replayed the scene in that private room again and again. The chandeliers, the men in suits, the way that interpreter's face had gone pale when Annie spoke, the way Mr. Whitmore had looked like the floor under him had shifted. And then there was that young server, Camila, stepping forward with her voice shaking, telling the truth anyway. Loretta swallowed hard. It took courage for a grown woman to do that in a rich man's room, but it took a different kind of courage for a child. Annie's voice broke the quiet. "Grandma?" "Yes, baby." Why would they lie to him? Loretta's grip tightened. She watched a pickup truck merge ahead of them, its brake lights glowing red in the mist. "Because some folks," Loretta said carefully, "think if you got more money than someone, you can take what you want." Annie frowned. "Like stealing?" Loretta almost smiled, but it came out tired. "Like stealing," she agreed. Annie stared out the window. "But he's white, and he's rich. How can somebody steal from him?" Loretta's throat tightened at the innocent honesty of that question. It would have been easy to give a simple answer. It would have been tempting to protect Annie from the complicated truth. But Loretta had raised children and grandchildren in Atlanta. She had watched neighborhoods change, watched jobs vanish, watched good people get pushed aside quietly. She didn't believe in lying to children just because the truth made adults uncomfortable. "Money don't make you untouchable," Loretta said. "It just makes people hide their hands better." Annie thought about that. "So he could still get hurt." "Yes," Loretta replied. "He can." Annie's voice went quieter. "Could we get hurt?" Loretta's chest tightened. That was the real question. Loretta didn't want to plant fear in Annie's heart, but she also didn't want Annie thinking truth came without cost. Loretta had lived too long to pretend otherwise. "We're going to be careful," Loretta said. "And we're going to keep doing right. That's all we can control." Annie nodded slowly. They passed the bright restaurants along Peachtree, people laughing behind glass windows, couples leaning over plates, valet attendants running in and out of expensive cars. Atlanta doing what it always did, keeping its pretty face forward. Loretta turned onto the highway toward the south side. Her apartment complex wasn't far, but it might as well have been a different country from that private dining room. Annie yawned once, then fought it, stubborn. "I'm not sleepy," she announced. Loretta glanced in the rearview mirror. Annie's eyelids were already heavy. "You don't have to be brave all night," Loretta said gently. Annie's mouth tightened. "I didn't want you to lose your job," Annie whispered. Loretta's heart clenched. She signaled and changed lanes, her voice steady but warm. "Baby, listen to me. Jobs come and go. You only get one conscience." Annie blinked slowly. "What's a conscience?" Loretta smiled, faintly. "It's that feeling inside you that tells you when something's wrong. The part of you that won't let you sleep good if you do wrong." Annie considered that, then asked, "Did Mr. Whitmore have a conscience?" Loretta thought about the way he'd knelt down to Annie's level. Thought about the softness in his eyes when he said thank you. "Yes," Loretta said. "I believe he does." The car rolled under an overpass, the sound of tires on wet asphalt steady and hypnotic. Annie's head tipped to one side. Loretta kept driving, her mind drifting. She thought of her own youth, back when Atlanta was smaller, back when she had believed hard work was always enough. She remembered being 25 and getting passed over for a promotion because customers preferred a certain look. She remembered the humiliation of hearing that phrase and smiling anyway because she needed the paycheck. She had learned then what she wanted Annie to learn now. Injustice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was polite. Sometimes it wore a name tag. Sometimes it smiled while it took something from you. She pulled into the apartment complex, the familiar cracked pavement and dim lights. She parked and turned off the engine. The quiet that followed felt sacred. Annie was half asleep, but her eyes opened when Loretta unbuckled her. "Grandma," Annie murmured. "Are they going to come for us?" Loretta froze for half a second. There it was, the fear she'd been trying not to name. She gathered Annie into her arms, feeling the warmth of her small body, the child smell of cocoa and laundry detergent. Loretta pressed her cheek against Annie's hair. "No," she said firmly. "Nobody's coming for you. Not while I'm breathing." Annie's body relaxed slightly. Loretta carried her up the stairs, past neighbors' doors with muffled televisions and late-night arguments, past the smell of fried onions from somebody's kitchen. Inside their small apartment, Loretta laid Annie in bed and tucked the blanket up to her chin. Annie's eyes fluttered. "You promised," she whispered. Loretta brushed a kiss against Annie's forehead. "I promise." After Annie's breathing slowed, Loretta sat alone at the kitchen table. The overhead light buzzed faintly. She stared at her hands that had scrubbed floors for decades. Hands that had raised a family. Hands that were still trembling. Her phone sat on the table beside a stack of unopened mail. Loretta did not have Daniel Whitmore's number. Yet. But she knew tomorrow, when she and Annie went to his office, the world would move again. Investigations. Questions. Risk. And still underneath her fear there was something else. Pride. A quiet, stubborn pride. Loretta whispered into the empty kitchen, as if speaking to God or to her own tired soul. Truth don't need to shout. She looked toward Annie's closed bedroom door. It just needs courage. Daniel Whitmore woke before his alarm. That wasn't unusual. He'd been waking up early since his 20s, back when the only way to stay ahead of the kind of people who smiled while they took from you was to get up before they did. But this morning, it wasn't ambition that pulled him out of sleep. It was Annie's voice. The interpreter is hiding something. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed in the quiet of his Buckhead home. The city still dim outside the windows. He ran a hand over his face, then reached for his phone. 6 to 7 a.m. He didn't call anyone yet. He knew better than to light a fire before he could control the burn. Instead, he stared at the ceiling and let the facts line up the way he would line up numbers on a spreadsheet. Marcus Klein met Ethan Cole in the hallway. A document folder passed hands. A clause appeared in the German master copy that did not match the English summary he'd been given. 40% undervaluation. Deferred voting control. That was not a misunderstanding. That was a plan. Daniel stood, showered, and dressed in the same quiet uniform he wore when he needed his mind clear. Charcoal slacks, white shirt, navy blazer. No tie. No jewelry besides the watch his mother had bought him when Whitmore Tech first went public, back when she still couldn't quite believe her son's name had ended up on the news for something good. In the kitchen, the coffee machine hummed. Daniel poured a mug and didn't drink it right away. He watched the dark surface ripple, thinking of all the times he'd spoken about corporate ethics, as if ethics were a policy you could print and file. Ethics were a decision, and he had almost made the wrong one last night. He finally took a sip, grabbed his keys, and left. His office sat in Midtown Atlanta in a glass and steel building that reflected the morning like it belonged to the sky. The lobby smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and polished stone. Employees moved through the space with the quiet urgency of people who believed their work mattered. Daniel entered without ceremony. He didn't like the drama of power. He liked the work. His executive floor felt different without Ethan. That absence was a shadow. At 7:02 a.m., Rebecca Sloan appeared at his doorway with a thin stack of papers, and a look that said she had not slept much either. "Morning," she said. "Tell me," Daniel replied. Rebecca stepped inside and set the documents on his desk. Compliance locked down all transaction approvals tied to the Reinhardt deal. IT is preserving email and chat records. Marcus Reed pulled hallway footage and door swipe logs. Ethan's access shows irregular patterns, especially late nights. Daniel's jaw tightened. How late? Midnight to 2 a.m. several times in the last month. Daniel leaned back slightly. And Marcus? Rebecca's expression flattened. Marcus's account has downloads that don't match his stated workload. He accessed internal valuation models he had no business touching. Daniel's fingers tapped once against the wood. Not nervous. Controlled. "Good," he said. Rebecca blinked. "Good? Good that we're seeing it. I'd rather know." Rebecca nodded. She'd been with Daniel long enough to understand he wasn't celebrating betrayal. He was refusing to let it hide. She hesitated, then added, "There's something else." Daniel looked up. Rebecca slid another page forward. Ethan Cole attempted to authorize an off-cycle vendor payment 2 weeks ago. It was flagged but not approved. A vendor payment to whom? Rebecca read the name. A consulting firm with a mailbox address. No real footprint. Daniel stared at the paper. His coffee tasted bitter now. "You'll bring in federal authorities," Rebecca said carefully, "and it'll hit the news." Daniel's gaze stayed steady. If we did nothing, it would hit the news anyway. Only difference is the headline. Rebecca watched him for a moment. "You're thinking about the child." Daniel didn't deny it. "I am," he said. "And her grandmother." Rebecca's voice softened. "Their staff. People talk. Someone will try to pull them into this." Daniel stood and walked to the window. Midtown stretched below traffic. Early joggers. A delivery truck double-parked with a man waving apologies. Life continuing in a city that didn't stop for anybody's crisis. Daniel spoke without looking back. I want Annie and Loretta protected from this, he said. No press, no internal gossip, no hero story. In a company-wide email, Rebecca's mouth tightened slightly. You don't want to praise them publicly? I want to respect them, Daniel replied. There's a difference. Rebecca nodded once. She understood. Daniel turned back. Set a meeting for this afternoon. Quiet. Small conference room. I want to speak to them personally. Rebecca made a note. I'll arrange it. And transportation, Daniel added. Send a car. Not a limo. Something normal. Rebecca allowed a faint smile. Understood. She paused at the door. Daniel, last night, you told security to escort Marcus out. Do you want him detained? Not yet, Daniel said. If he's part of something bigger, he'll try to run. Let him think he still has options. Rebecca's eyes sharpened. That's risky. Daniel's voice stayed calm. So is signing a contract you can't read. Rebecca left. Daniel remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, eyes on the city. For a moment, his thoughts slipped somewhere quieter. I almost signed. The admission felt like swallowing something sharp. He imagined Annie's small hands holding that water bottle. Imagined Loretta's face when she thought her job and maybe her safety was about to be taken because a child had spoken up. Daniel had sat in rooms full of powerful men. He'd heard lies delivered with polished confidence. He'd watched careers rise and fall on subtle betrayals, but he hadn't expected truth to arrive wearing yellow ribbons. His phone buzzed. Marcus Reed. Daniel answered. Go ahead. We pulled more camera footage, Marcus said. Not just the hallway. The service corridor too. Daniel's focus tightened. And Ethan met Marcus twice in the last week in the same area, Marcus replied. Same pattern. Same folder. Daniel's throat tightened. Print the stills. Get timestamps. Preserve everything. Already done, Marcus said. Then quieter. You were lucky last night. Daniel stared at the window. No, Marcus hesitated. No? Daniel's voice lowered. Lucky would have been signing and never finding out. There was silence on the line. Marcus finally said, Fair point. After the call, Daniel sat at his desk and opened his calendar. The day was packed. Product briefing, investor call, board prep. All the ordinary machinery of a company. But one meeting mattered more than the rest. Annie and Loretta. Not because of sentiment. Because they were a reminder, a warning, a conscience knocking on a door that wealth and routine had almost closed. Daniel reached for a legal pad and wrote 2 words at the top. Truth costs. Then, beneath it, he wrote a second line. So does silence. He stared at those words until they stopped looking like ink and started looking like a promise. Outside, the city brightened. Inside, Whitmore Tech quietly pivoted into a different kind of day. The kind where power had to prove what it claimed to be. Loretta Mae Johnson spent the morning doing what she always did when life threatened to spin out of control. She cleaned, not because the apartment was dirty. It wasn't. Loretta kept a tidy home the way some people kept faith quietly, consistently, without needing applause. But scrubbing the kitchen counter and folding towels gave her hands something to do while her mind tried to hold steady. Annie sat at the small table with a box of crayons, coloring a picture of a tall building with a bright yellow sun above it. That's the restaurant, Annie said, tapping the drawing with her crayon. And that's where Mr. Whitmore is. Loretta nodded, smoothing a dish towel. And that's you. Annie added, drawing a stick figure with gray hair and a broom. You're the strongest. Loretta's throat tightened. Baby, you don't have to draw me strong. I'm just tired. Annie frowned in concentration, then colored the broom anyway. The phone rang at 10:18 a.m. Loretta wiped her hands and answered carefully, as if the wrong hello could invite trouble into her home. Mrs. Johnson? A polite woman asked. My name is Denise. I'm calling from Mr. Whitmore's office. He'd like to meet with you and Annie this afternoon at 2:30. A car will pick you up at 1:45. Loretta's heart thumped. Why does he want to meet? She asked. Mr. Whitmore would like to thank you personally and discuss what happened last night, Denise said. He also wants to assure you that you and Annie are safe. Loretta's fingers tightened around the phone. Safe. It was a word people used when they couldn't guarantee anything. All right, Loretta said slowly. We'll be ready. When she hung up, Annie looked up from her drawing, eyes wide. Is it time? Annie asked. Not yet, Loretta replied. She kept her voice calm. This afternoon, Annie nodded. then returned to coloring as if meeting a billionaire was just another item on a child's schedule. Loretta went into the bedroom and opened her closet. She did not have many choices. 2 church dresses, 1 work uniform, and a navy blouse she kept for funerals and serious meetings, as she called them. She chose the navy blouse and pressed it carefully, the iron hissing like a warning. She dressed Annie in a simple blue dress and brushed her hair into neat braids, tying the yellow ribbons again because Annie insisted. "Grandma," Annie said while Loretta tied the bow. "Are they mad at me?" Loretta paused, hands gentle. "No, baby. Mr. Whitmore isn't mad. How do you know?" Loretta thought of the way Daniel Whitmore knelt to Annie's level, the way he said thank you like it wasn't charity. "Because when a man's mad," Loretta said, "he tries to make you small. That man didn't do that." At 1:43, a black sedan pulled up outside the complex. Not a limo, not a showpiece, just a clean car with tinted windows. Loretta's neighbor, Mrs. Davenport, peeked through her blinds like she was watching a story unfold. Loretta held Annie's hand and walked out anyway. The driver was a middle-aged man with kind eyes. He stepped out, opened the rear door, and tipped his head respectfully. "Mrs. Johnson? Annie?" he asked. Loretta nodded. "Yes. My name is Raymond," he said. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to bring you in. He didn't mention why. He didn't stare. He didn't act like they were a spectacle." Loretta appreciated that more than she could put into words. The ride into Midtown felt longer than it was. Annie pressed her face to the window, watching the city change. Old brick buildings gave way to glass. Neighborhoods shifted from working class to corporate, the sidewalks filled with people in suits holding coffee cups and earbuds. Loretta watched them and felt something familiar in her chest, an old resentment mixed with tired acceptance. These people lived in a world where one signature could mean millions. In her world, one signature could mean whether the lights stayed on. The car pulled into the Whitmore Tech Building's underground garage. Raymond escorted them to a private elevator, swiped a badge, and stepped back. "You'll go to the 27th floor," he said. "Reception will meet you." Loretta took Annie's hand and stepped inside. The elevator rose smoothly, silent as a confession. Annie looked up at the ceiling lights. "It smells like clean," she said. Loretta almost smiled. "That's because they pay somebody to make it smell like that." The doors opened to a bright reception area with polished stone floors and art on the walls that looked expensive but empty of warmth. Denise, a neat woman in her 50s with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain, approached with an expression that held kindness and professionalism at the same time. "Mrs. Johnson, Annie," Denise said warmly. "Thank you for coming. Mr. Whitmore is ready for you." Loretta nodded. "Thank you." Denise led them down a hallway lined with framed photographs, Daniel Whitmore shaking hands at charity events, Daniel Whitmore standing beside university presidents, Daniel Whitmore speaking at conferences, every image polished, every smile controlled. Annie walked quietly, clutching Loretta's hand. They entered a small conference room, not the grand boardroom. That mattered, Loretta noticed. Daniel Whitmore stood when they walked in. No assistant hovering, no entourage, just him, in a navy blazer, sleeves crisp, eyes tired. "Mrs. Johnson," he said. "Annie." Loretta's instinct was to apologize again. Years of working for people with money had trained her to soften herself before they could harden against her. But Daniel spoke first. "I want to say something clearly," he said, voice calm. "Last night, Annie did the right thing." Loretta held her breath. Daniel walked around the table and lowered himself again to Annie's height. A deliberate choice, not a performance. "You were brave," he told her. Annie looked at her shoes. "I was scared." Daniel nodded. "Bravery usually includes fear." Annie glanced up. "Are you going to fire Grandma?" Loretta's chest tightened so hard it hurt. Daniel's expression softened. "No," he said firmly. "Your grandmother is not losing her job." Annie's shoulders relaxed. Loretta swallowed, eyes stinging despite herself. "Thank you, sir." Daniel stood and looked at Loretta directly. "I reviewed security footage," he said. "Annie's account matches what happened. My staff also confirmed it." Loretta nodded slowly. "Camila?" "Yes," Daniel said. "Camila helped, and Annie, she started it." He gestured toward the chairs. "Please sit." Loretta sat, smoothing her blouse. Annie climbed into a chair and swung her legs slightly, trying to look older than 6. Daniel took a seat across from them. "I want to be honest with you," he said. "This wasn't just a bad interpreter. This was an internal betrayal. Loretta's jaw tightened. By that assistant? Daniel held her gaze. We're investigating. But yes, he was involved. Annie leaned forward. Is he going to get in trouble? Daniel's eyes flicked to her. Careful. He will face consequences. The kind adults face when they choose dishonesty. Loretta's fingers curled in her lap. And what about us? She asked quietly. She hated that she had to ask. But she had lived long enough to know questions didn't protect you if you never asked them. Daniel nodded as if he'd been expecting that. That's why I asked you here, he said. First, to assure you no one in my company will retaliate against you. Second, to make sure you're protected if anyone outside my company tries. Loretta's mouth went dry. Outside? She repeated. Daniel's voice lowered. When money is involved, people panic. Loretta thought of Annie's question in the car. Could we get hurt? She looked at Daniel and realized he was thinking the same thing. Daniel leaned forward slightly, hands folded. I'm assigning security to be present near your apartment for a few days, he said. Not visible. Not to scare you. Just to make sure nothing happens. Loretta's pride flared. Then she remembered Annie in that room, holding a water bottle like a shield. Pride didn't keep a child safe. Loretta nodded slowly. All right, Daniel continued. And I want to do something else, quietly, without press. Loretta's eyes narrowed slightly. She'd seen rich men offer help that wasn't help at all. Help that came with strings. Daniel seemed to read her caution. This is not charity, he said. This is accountability. My company put you in that room last night. My company benefited from Annie's honesty. I intend to respond appropriately. He slid a plain envelope across the table. Loretta didn't touch it yet. What is it? She asked. Daniel met her eyes. A written assurance of employment protection for you, he said, and a stipend for Annie's education expenses. No publicity, no conditions. Loretta's throat tightened. Annie whispered, Grandma, is that a scholarship? Loretta managed a small smile. Maybe, baby. Daniel watched them both, then said something that landed deeper than the envelope. My mother cleaned houses when I was a kid, he said quietly. She used to say the same thing your granddaughter said last night. Good people don't stay quiet. Loretta blinked. That detail rearranged the room slightly. Like a chair pulled closer. Daniel's voice stayed steady, but his eyes were tired in a way money didn't fix. I built this company to mean something, he said. Last night reminded me that meaning has to be protected. Loretta finally placed her hand on the envelope, feeling the weight of paper, the weight of someone trying maybe for once to do right. She nodded once. Thank you, she said. For seeing her. Not just what she did, Daniel nodded back. Some people go their whole lives being invisible, he said. Annie made herself seen. That matters. Annie sat up straighter, as if she could feel that respect in her bones. Outside the conference room, the city moved on, unaware. Inside, a quiet agreement formed, one built not on contracts, but on something rarer. A shared understanding that truth, once spoken, changes everything. Loretta left Whitmore Tech with the envelope tucked inside her purse like it might spill out if she handled it wrong. Not because it was heavy. Paper never was. Because it meant something. It meant a door had opened in a world that usually kept people like her on the other side of the glass. Raymond walked them back to the elevator with the same quiet respect he'd shown in the parking lot. No rushing, no staring. No questions he wasn't entitled to ask. Annie skipped once, then caught herself, remembering she was supposed to be serious, in a building full of serious adults. She settled for swinging Loretta's hand instead. Small fingers warm and insistent. In the car, Annie leaned forward between the front seats. Mr. Raymond, do you work for Mr. Whitmore all the time? Raymond smiled in the rearview mirror. Most days. Is he nice to you? Loretta's heart tightened at the innocence of that question. Children asked what adults were trained to swallow. Raymond's smile softened. He's fair. That matters more than nice sometimes. Annie considered that, as if filing it away for later. Loretta looked out the window as Midtown slid into downtown, then into streets with older storefronts and tired sidewalks. The city changed by the block, like someone flipping channels. Her phone buzzed in her lap. A text from Camila. You okay? People talking at work. Manager acting weird. Be careful. Loretta's stomach sank. She hadn't expected that part to wait politely. At the apartment complex, Loretta noticed two things immediately. The light by the stairwell that usually flickered was steady today, and a dark SUV was parked in a space that didn't belong to any neighbor she recognized. A man leaned against it, not loitering, not staring, just present. He looked like he could be someone's uncle, someone's contractor, someone you wouldn't remember if you passed him in a grocery store. He gave Loretta a small nod as she walked by. Loretta's hand tightened around Annie's. Annie whispered, "Grandma, is that one of Mr. Whitmore's guards?" Loretta didn't answer right away. She kept her face neutral. "Inside," she said softly. "We'll talk inside." The apartment felt smaller when Loretta shut the door behind them, like the walls leaned in to listen. She set her keys down carefully, then sat at the kitchen table and finally allowed herself to open the envelope. Annie climbed into her chair, legs swinging. Loretta pulled out the first page, a formal letter on Whitmore Tech letterhead, signed by Daniel Whitmore, stating that Loretta Mae Johnson's employment would be protected, that retaliation would not be tolerated, and that any harassment, internal or external, should be reported immediately. Clear language, legal language, the kind of language that made people pause. She read it twice. Then she pulled out the second paper, a stipend agreement for Annie's educational expenses, written in plain terms with no media clause, no publicity requirement, no demand for gratitude on a stage. Loretta stared at it until her eyes blurred. Annie leaned forward. "Is it a scholarship?" Loretta let out a slow breath. "It's help." Annie smiled brightly. "So I can go to a big college?" Loretta tried to smile back. "Lord willing, baby." Then Annie's smile faded a little. "Grandma," she asked, "are those bad men going to be mad at us?" There it was again, the fear creeping in around the edges of the good. Loretta reached across the table and took Annie's hands. "Listen to me," Loretta said. "You did right. You hear me? Whatever comes, you did right." Annie nodded, lower lip trembling. Loretta squeezed her hands gently. "Now go pick out a book. We're going to keep today normal as we can." Annie slid down from the chair and padded to her small bookshelf in the corner, where the spines were worn soft from love. Loretta sat alone for a moment and let her shoulders sag. In her mind, she saw the private dining room again. Marcus's pale face, Ethan's tight jaw, Daniel's controlled calm. The way power had shifted without anyone raising their voice. Loretta had lived long enough to know. When powerful people lose control, they don't always lose quietly. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from the restaurant. Gerald Pittman, the night manager. Loretta stared at the screen for 2 full rings before answering. "Miss Johnson," Gerald said, voice too careful. "I wanted to check on you." Loretta held the phone away from her ear slightly, as if distance could protect her. "I'm fine," she replied. "Annie's fine." A pause, then Gerald continued. "There's been discussion among the staff. Folks are saying you and that child caused a scene with Mr. Whitmore." Loretta's jaw tightened. "My granddaughter told the truth." Another pause. Gerald lowered his voice. "Look, I'm not accusing you of anything, but the owner has been asking questions. The VIP suite is already a sensitive situation, and..." Loretta cut in gently, because she had learned the power of calm in a life where anger was often punished. "Gerald," she said, "are you calling to fire me?" Silence. Then Gerald sighed. "No, not today." Loretta heard the truth inside that sentence. "Not today." "Thank you for checking," Loretta said, tone steady. "If anyone has questions, they can speak to Mr. Whitmore's office. He's aware of what happened." Gerald's breath caught slightly. "Yes," he said quickly. "Of course." He hung up. Loretta stared at her phone for a moment, then placed it face down on the table like it had offended her. From the living room corner, Annie's small voice floated in. "Grandma, can I read the one about the brave girl again?" Loretta's throat tightened. "Yes, baby. Read it." Annie began reading softly, sounding out words with determination. Loretta listened, letting the rhythm of her granddaughter's voice anchor her. Then she stood and walked to the window, careful not to move the blinds too much. The dark SUV was still there. The man leaned against it, glancing at the stairwell, then away. A presence meant to be felt only if you knew to look for it. Loretta felt 2 emotions at once, relief because someone was watching, and anger because she needed someone to watch at all. Her phone rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. Loretta hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Johnson?" a man asked, voice polite, professional. "This is Marcus Reed, head of security for Whitmore Tech. Mr. Whitmore asked me to check in." Loretta kept her tone measured. "Yes," I want you to know we have eyes near your building, Marcus said. Not inside, not in your space, just nearby. If anything feels off, you call this number day or night. Loretta glanced toward Annie. I don't want to frighten her, Loretta said quietly. Marcus's voice softened slightly. Understood. We're not here to frighten anyone. We're here to make sure nothing happens because a child told the truth. Loretta closed her eyes briefly. Thank you, she said. After she hung up, she stood in the kitchen, looking at the papers on the table. Protection letter, education stipend, 2 pieces of paper trying to balance a scale that had been tipped long before Annie ever walked into that restroom hallway. Loretta thought of all the times she'd swallowed words to keep a job, all the times she'd smiled through disrespect because rent didn't care about pride. And now Annie had spoken once, and the world was moving around it. Truth has a cost, Daniel Whitmore had said in his own way. Loretta understood that cost better than most people in suits ever would. She walked back to the table, gathered the papers, and placed them carefully into a folder she kept for important things. Birth certificates, insurance cards, the kind of documents that meant you existed in America. Then she looked toward Annie, still reading softly. Loretta's chest ached with love and fear. But underneath both, something else lived. A stubborn, quiet certainty. If a 6-year-old could stand in a room full of powerful men and tell the truth, then Loretta could stand in her own life and stop shrinking. She walked into the living room and sat beside Annie. Baby, she said softly. Annie looked up. Yes, Grandma? Loretta smoothed Annie's braid gently. No matter what anybody says at that restaurant, you didn't embarrass us. Annie's eyes widened. I didn't? Loretta shook her head. You honored us. Annie's shoulders relaxed, and she leaned into Loretta's side like she finally believed she was allowed to breathe. Outside, the dark SUV remained, quiet as a shadow. Inside, Loretta held her granddaughter close and understood something she'd learned late in life but wished she'd learned sooner. Silence might keep you employed, but it doesn't keep you whole. Daniel Whitmore didn't sleep well the second night either, not because he feared scandal. Daniel had survived hostile press cycles and short sellers and boardroom ambushes. He knew how quickly people turned ethics into headlines and headlines into weapons. He slept poorly because betrayal made the world feel slightly unreliable, like walking across a familiar floor and discovering the boards had softened underneath. At sex, Fertio he was already in his office, jacket on, coffee untouched, staring at a conference table covered in paper. Not one contract. 3. The German master copy, Marcus Klein's English summary, and Rebecca Sloane's independent translation printout, annotated in neat blue ink. Rebecca sat across from him, hair pulled back, glasses perched low on her nose. She looked like she belonged in court because she'd been raised by a public defender father in Macon, and had learned young that the law was supposed to protect the weak, but often protected the clever. This is where it changes, Rebecca said, tapping a line with her pen. Section 9 starts clean. Then the language turns. Daniel leaned in. The German text ran long, dense, formal. Like a river that suddenly deepened, Rebecca continued. Here's the trick. The clause isn't presented as, we're buying your shares cheap. It's presented as temporary valuation adjustment based on risk exposure. Sounds reasonable if you don't know what it's hiding. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What is it hiding? Rebecca slid the page toward him and read aloud. Deferred voting rights. The buyer gets governance oversight for 18 months. During that period, if certain performance thresholds aren't met they control the interpretation of then the valuation adjustment becomes permanent. Daniel's jaw tightened. In plain English? He asked. In plain English, Rebecca said, meeting his eyes. You sell a chunk of your company at a discount, and they get control long enough to steer you into underperformance. Then the discount locks in, and they've effectively bought influence at a bargain price. Daniel sat back slowly. It was elegant. Ugly, but elegant. He thought of Marcus's smooth voice in negotiations, always calm, always precise. He thought of how that calm now felt like a mask. Daniel spoke quietly, almost to himself. This was designed to look like my idea. Rebecca nodded. That's why Marcus's English summary is so dangerous. It makes you think you agreed to a temporary advisory arrangement. It reads like a strategic concession. Daniel stared at the contract. He imagined the board members reading it later, after a bad quarter, after control had shifted. He imagined them asking, "How could you sign this?" He imagined having no good answer. He inhaled slowly. Where else is it compromised? Rebecca flipped pages. Section 14, Governance Transfer Language. Again, it's written like operational efficiency, but it's really power. She paused, then added, and Daniel, the timing. These clauses appear in the final German revision. That means someone on our side approved the version going to signature. Daniel didn't ask who. He already knew. Ethan Cole was the gatekeeper. Marcus Klein was the mouth. Two trusted men. One path to a stolen company. Daniel rose and walked to the window. Midtown Atlanta glowed in early daylight, the city already in motion. A man pushed a cart of pastries into a cafe. A woman in scrubs crossed the street with a tired posture. An older couple held hands slowly at the corner, as if they had learned the rhythm of life was not meant to be rushed. Daniel thought about that couple. People over 45 understood something younger people sometimes didn't. You could spend decades building a life, and it could be threatened by one careless moment. Daniel returned to the table. I want to understand how deep this goes, he said. Rebecca's voice stayed professional. Marcus is pulling full access logs, Ethan's badge entries, Marcus's downloads. We're mapping communications. Daniel nodded. And the German side? Rebecca's mouth tightened. They're likely not innocent, but they may not be the core of the betrayal. A deal like this can be drafted by their lawyers and still require internal help to get signed without scrutiny. Daniel tapped his knuckle once on the table. So our betrayal is the key. Rebecca hesitated, then said, it's also the most painful. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He thought of his early years hiring people based on hunger and loyalty because he didn't have cash to compete with big firms. He thought of Ethan arriving as a young assistant with sharp eyes and faster fingers, always one step ahead, always saying, I've got it, sir. Daniel had liked being able to rely on someone. He'd confused reliability with integrity. A soft knock interrupted. Marcus Reed stepped in, carrying a plain folder and the weight of a man used to delivering bad news without drama. Morning, Marcus said. Daniel nodded. Tell me. Marcus placed the folder down. Inside were still images from the hallway security footage. Ethan handing Marcus a document folder. Marcus opening it. Ethan pointing. This happened last night, Marcus said. And twice last week. Same corridor. Same handoff. Different folder each time. Rebecca leaned in. Do we have door swipe logs? Marcus nodded. Yes. Ethan's badge used late nights in legal document storage. Marcus had no badge access there, but his computer shows he pulled draft files within minutes of Ethan accessing the storage. Daniel felt the pattern click into place like gears. You're saying Ethan retrieved the German revisions and fed them to Marcus, Daniel said. That's what it looks like, Marcus replied. Rebecca flipped a page. What about external contact? Marcus's expression hardened. We found a burner number on Ethan's desk phone call logs, outgoing calls routed through a forwarding app. We're working with IT to trace it, but it's sophisticated enough to suggest he didn't build it alone. Daniel's eyes narrowed. So there's someone outside? Marcus nodded once. Or someone higher up in the deal chain. Not necessarily higher in our company, but connected. Rebecca spoke quietly. Financial crimes will want this. Daniel nodded. They'll get it. He paused, then asked the question that mattered in a different way. And Annie? Loretta? Marcus's tone shifted slightly, softer. We have a plainclothes presence near their building. No contact unless needed. Daniel exhaled. Good. Rebecca watched him for a moment. You're thinking about the child again. Daniel didn't deny it. He looked down at the contract. I'm thinking about the fact that I sat in a room with 12 grown men, he said slowly, and the only person willing to interrupt a lie was a 6-year-old girl. Marcus let out a low breath. That's something. Daniel tapped the German master copy with one finger. This contract, he said, was written for one purpose, to take advantage of what I don't know. Rebecca nodded. And of what you assumed. Daniel's voice lowered. I assumed loyalty. Silence settled for a beat. Then Rebecca said, what's the next step? Daniel straightened, returning to the part of him that made decisions when things turned dangerous. First, we preserve everything, he said. Second, we control who learns what and when. Third, we renegotiate with the German delegation only after we've secured our internal foundation. Marcus nodded. And Ethan? Daniel's expression hardened. We let him think he can still talk his way out. Rebecca lifted an eyebrow. You want him to make a move? Daniel nodded. People reveal themselves when they think they're losing. Marcus shifted his weight. That means there's a chance he tries to reach out to the Johnsons. Daniel's gaze sharpened. Then we make sure he can't. He looked at the papers again. German text, English lies, blue ink, truth. Then he said quietly, almost like a lesson he was teaching himself. Justice isn't loud, it's patient. Rebecca's pen stopped moving. Marcus's eyes flicked to him, then away. Daniel stood at the table, hands flat against the wood, and felt the shape of the next days forming. This wasn't just an internal HR issue. It was a warning, a test, and he wasn't going to fail it. Ethan Cole walked out of Whitmore Tech with his chin lifted and his hands empty. To anyone watching from the lobby, he looked like a man who had simply finished a meeting early. His suit was pressed. His hair was neat. His smile, what little of it appeared, was professional. Only his eyes gave him away. They kept moving, not in panic, in calculation. He stepped into the sunlight of Midtown and paused beside the revolving door, as if deciding which direction his story would go next. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through contacts that were not saved with names, numbers only. That was the first thing Ethan did wrong. He assumed no one would notice, but Marcus Reed noticed everything. From a plain sedan across the street, Marcus watched Ethan through a pair of sunglasses that hid his focus. He didn't need binoculars. He needed patience. 28 years in law enforcement had taught him the same lesson Daniel Whitmore was learning now. Guilt had a rhythm. Marcus spoke into a discreet earpiece. He's moving. Inside the building, Daniel stood in his office with Rebecca Sloan, watching a live feed from security. Daniel's face remained calm, but his jaw worked slowly as if he was grinding something bitter. He thinks he still has room, Rebecca said quietly. He does, Daniel replied. Just not the kind he wants. Ethan didn't go to his car. He walked 2 blocks to a coffee shop that catered to tech workers and investors, the kind of place where people talked in low voices and paid $7 for oat milk without flinching. He ordered black coffee, no sugar, and took a seat in the far corner, where he could watch the door. Marcus watched him from outside through the glass. Ethan pulled a thin envelope from inside his jacket, creased as if it had been held too tightly. He opened it, glanced at the contents, then slid it back inside. Rebecca leaned closer to the screen. What do you think that is? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He watched Ethan's fingers, the way they tapped once against the tabletop, then stilled. A plan, Daniel said finally. Or an insurance policy. Ethan's phone buzzed. He read the message and didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked out the window toward the street, eyes scanning like he could sense the shadow of consequence behind him. Then he stood and left his coffee untouched. Marcus followed at a distance. Ethan walked toward a parking garage, took the stairs down, and disappeared from camera for a few minutes. When he emerged, he was driving a different car than the one registered to him through corporate records, an older gray sedan that blended into traffic like a thought you couldn't quite hold on to. Marcus clicked his tongue softly. He's switching vehicles, Marcus murmured. He's trying to shake a tail. Daniel's voice remained steady on the other end. Don't lose him. Marcus's answer was quiet. I won't. Ethan drove south, not toward the airport, not toward his condo, not toward any place a man would go if he planned to plead innocence. He drove toward the older parts of the city where storefronts were smaller, security cameras fewer, and people were less interested in asking questions. He stopped at a strip mall with a pawn shop, a tax service, and a nail salon with peeling letters in the window. He parked behind the building where the dumpsters sat and stepped out. Phone in hand, Marcus parked 2 rows away, partially hidden behind a delivery van. Ethan dialed. Waited, his shoulders tensed. Marcus didn't hear the words, but he watched Ethan's mouth move. Saw the sharpness in the way he spoke, the impatience. Then Ethan's posture changed. He was listening now, listening like someone being reminded of the rules. When the call ended, Ethan leaned against the brick wall for a moment, staring at nothing. He looked angry, not scared. Angry. Daniel watched the footage and felt something settle into place. Ethan wasn't a man caught in a mistake. He was a man caught in a bargain. Rebecca studied Daniel's face. He's contacting someone. Yes, Daniel said. And whoever it is has leverage. Rebecca's voice lowered. We need federal involvement sooner rather than later. Daniel nodded. I'll authorize it. But Daniel's eyes stayed on the screen. On Ethan pushing off the wall. On the way, he slipped the phone into his pocket and walked toward the front of the strip mall. Head down now. Moving with purpose. "That's not a man going to confess," Daniel said quietly. Rebecca's expression tightened. "That's a man going to control damage." Daniel's gaze sharpened. Exactly. Damage control had a predictable target. Not the CEO, not the lawyers, not the German delegation. The weakest link. The witnesses who didn't have power to fight back. Loretta and Annie. Daniel picked up his phone and called Marcus directly. "Marcus," he said, "I want you to increase the presence near the Johnsons." Immediately, Marcus's voice stayed calm. "Already moving 2 more units." Daniel swallowed. "No visible contact unless necessary." "Understood." Rebecca leaned forward. "Daniel, if Ethan tries to approach them, we need a clear plan." Daniel's voice dropped. "He won't touch them." Rebecca studied him. "You sound certain." Daniel's eyes stayed on the feed as Ethan stepped into the nail salon, then out again within seconds, then crossed to a small storefront with no sign, just a black door and a smoked window. Marcus's voice came through, low and focused. "He's entering a business with blocked windows. No signage." "That's interesting." Daniel felt the hair at the back of his neck tighten. Ethan disappeared inside. Minutes passed. When he came out, he carried nothing. But his face looked different, like a man who had just been given a direction. He got into the gray sedan and drove again. This time not south, but east, toward Doraville. Rebecca's brows lifted. "Doraville?" Daniel's voice was quiet. "He's moving toward where working people live, where he thinks he can blend." Rebecca's mouth tightened. "Or where he thinks someone won't be protected." Daniel's hand curled into a fist against his desk. For a moment, the polished executive office felt like a costume, a layer of glass between him and the truth. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "People like Ethan," Daniel said. "Count on the fact that good people are afraid." Rebecca's eyes stayed on him. "And children," Daniel added quietly, "are supposed to be easy to scare." Daniel looked at the feed again. Ethan Cole drove through Atlanta like a man who believed he still had choices. But Daniel Whitmore had made his decision. He wasn't going to let courage be punished for doing his job. Not in his company. Not in his city. Not under his watch. Daniel Whitmore kept his face calm while the city moved around Ethan Cole like a current. On the live security feed, Ethan's gray sedan flowed east through Atlanta, traffic down I-85. Past exits Daniel had driven 1,000 times without thinking. The kind of roads you took when you believed you were still invisible. The kind you took when you were headed toward places where people didn't have corporate attorneys on speed dial. Rebecca Sloan stood beside Daniel's desk, arms folded, eyes fixed on the screen. "He's not going to his condo," she said. "No," Daniel replied. "He's going to wherever he thinks consequences can't reach." On the screen, Ethan's car merged into the Doraville area strip malls. Low-rise storefronts, Korean BBQ signs, auto body shops. A part of Atlanta that worked hard, kept its head down, and rarely made the evening news unless something went wrong. Marcus Reed's voice came through Daniel's phone, low and controlled. "He's slowed near Buford Highway," Marcus said. "He's circling." Daniel exhaled slowly. Buford Highway. The artery of immigrant communities and late-night diners. A place where you could disappear in plain sight, and no one would ask why. Rebecca's gaze shifted to Daniel. "You have an address for the Johnsons on file?" Daniel nodded once. "Yes," and he hated that he knew it. Not because he was ashamed of caring, but because knowing someone's address meant you understood how easily the world could find them. In his mind, he saw Annie again, yellow ribbons, scuffed sneakers, holding a water bottle like courage came in glass. He heard Loretta's voice in the break room, proud and afraid at the same time. Daniel turned away from the screen and walked to the window. The city was bright now. Midday sun glinting off towers. People walking with coffee cups and backpacks. The world looked clean from above. From above, everything looked clean. But Daniel had learned as a young man that what looked clean often hid rot underneath. He remembered the first time he'd been betrayed. He'd been 26, sitting in a small leased office with a folding table and 2 mismatched chairs, believing he was building something that would outlast him. His business partner at the time, smiling, charismatic, had altered vendor contracts, changed payment terms, skimmed money quietly for months. Daniel hadn't noticed at first. He had wanted to believe. That was the truth nobody liked to say out loud. Trust felt good. Trust made you feel like the work had meaning beyond profit. Trust was a shortcut through the exhausting task of verifying everything, and betrayal loved shortcuts. Daniel's phone buzzed, an incoming call from his mother. He stared at it for a moment longer than he normally would. He didn't want to bring her into this. Then he answered anyway. "Morning, Mama." Her voice was warm and practical. The voice of a woman who had scrubbed other people's bathrooms and still found a way to laugh at church on Sunday. "You been eating?" she asked. Daniel almost smiled. "It's noon. That wasn't my question." He exhaled. "Not yet. Daniel," she said, the single word carrying years of knowing him. "You can't run a company on caffeine and pride." He leaned his forehead lightly against the cool glass of the window. "I'm handling something. I saw something on the news feed," she said. "Not your name. Not yet. But I know your face when trouble is coming." Daniel didn't respond right away. His mother continued, softer. "You remember what your granddaddy used to say?" Daniel closed his eyes. "He did," he said. "A man's word is his house," Daniel murmured. "And if the foundation is rotten," she said, "you don't paint the porch, you fix the rot." Daniel opened his eyes. Rebecca watched him from behind, quiet, giving him room. "Mama," Daniel said, "a child saved me last night." His mother was silent for a beat. "A child?" she repeated. "A little girl," Daniel said. 6 years old. His mother's voice changed, as if she straightened on the other end of the line. "And you thanked her?" "Yes." "Good," she said firmly. "Because sometimes the Lord sends truth in a small package, so your pride can't argue with it." Daniel swallowed. He didn't consider himself overly religious, but he respected the kind of faith that had carried people through things money never touched. His mother added, "You do right by that baby." "I will," Daniel said quietly. "All right," she replied. "Now go eat something." He ended the call and stood there for a moment, letting the words settle. Your pride can't argue with it. That was the thing. Daniel's pride had been built around competence, around control, around the belief that he could see everything before it happened. But last night, he hadn't seen it. Annie had. That was humbling in a way he couldn't buy his way out of. He turned back to the screen. Ethan's sedan was parked now near a row of businesses. The camera angle from Marcus's unit was distant but clear enough to see Ethan stepping out, scanning his surroundings, then moving toward a payphone, mounted outside a small grocery, one of the last ones in the city, mostly for show, mostly ignored. Rebecca leaned forward. "He's using a payphone?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "He doesn't want to trace." Marcus's voice came through. "He's making a call." Looks brief. Daniel's mind ran through possibilities. If Ethan called an accomplice, what would he say? "I'm caught, I need help," or something uglier, "I need to silence the witnesses." Daniel felt anger rise hot, old, familiar. The anger of someone who had built something with his hands and watched another man try to steal it with a smile. The anger of knowing how often the powerful protected themselves by crushing people who couldn't fight back. Rebecca spoke softly, almost as if reading his thoughts. "Daniel, if he tries to reach Loretta and Annie." "He won't," Daniel said, sharper than he intended. Rebecca held his gaze. "We can't rely on will. We rely on preparation." Daniel exhaled slowly, letting the heat in his chest cool into focus. "You're right," he said. He returned to his desk and opened a drawer. Inside lay a small notebook, old-fashioned, paper, the kind he kept for decisions he needed to remember. He wrote one sentence, "Protect the truth-tellers." Then he wrote another, smaller beneath it, especially when they're easy targets. He looked up at Rebecca. "Call Marcus. Tell him if Ethan moves toward the Johnsons, we intervene. No warnings. No. Let's see what happens. We end it." Rebecca nodded and picked up her phone. Daniel watched the security feed again. Ethan finished his call, pocketed something, and started walking back toward his car. His shoulders were tense now, his jaw tight, the mask slipping. He believed he was cornered. Cornered men did desperate things. Daniel felt the weight of what he had to do settle onto him, not the weight of money or reputation, but the weight of leadership. A company wasn't just product lines and valuations. It was people. It was trust. It was the quiet promise that if you did the right thing, you wouldn't be punished for it. Daniel had spoken that promise in glossy annual reports. Now, he had to live it. On the screen, Ethan slid into the driver's seat and pulled out. Marcus's voice came through. "He's heading south again." Daniel stared at the moving car, at the city that held both wealth and struggle in the same square miles, and understood something with a clarity that made his stomach tighten. This wasn't over, not because of the contract, because of what the contract represented. A lie had been planted inside his company, watered by ambition, protected by silence, and it had been exposed by a child who refused to stay quiet. Justice might be patient, Daniel thought, but it still needed someone willing to act. By late afternoon, Whitmore Tech felt like a building holding its breath. The usual rhythm was still there, keycards tapping, elevators chiming, keyboards clicking, but beneath it ran a thin current of unease. People sensed when the air changed. They might not know why, but they knew. In corporate America, fear rarely announced itself. It showed up as whispers near the coffee machine, sudden politeness in hallways, and eyes that looked away too quickly. Daniel Whitmore sat in his office with the blinds half drawn, not because he wanted secrecy, but because he wanted focus. On the desk in front of him lay a single page, an official notice prepared by HR and reviewed by legal. Subject: immediate suspension pending investigation. 2 names: Marcus Klein, Ethan Cole. Rebecca Sloan stood by the door with her tablet in hand, her posture steady, her expression hard enough to cut. "The notices are ready," she said. "IT has locked their credentials. Security has retrieved their devices." Daniel nodded once. "Any backlash?" Rebecca's mouth tightened. "Some managers are nervous. Ethan had relationships. Marcus had a reputation." Daniel looked up. "Reputation is not evidence." Rebecca leaned forward slightly. "Financial crimes is waiting on the formal referral." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Send it." Rebecca hesitated. "Once federal is involved, we lose control of timeline." Daniel's voice stayed calm. "We lost control the moment they tried to steal the company." Rebecca nodded. She understood. Daniel stood and picked up the paper. The simple act of holding it felt heavier than it should have. Not because he doubted the decision, he didn't, but because suspending people you once trusted was like cutting away infected tissue. Necessary, painful, and never as clean as you wished. He walked to the small conference room adjacent to his office. Marcus Reed waited inside with 2 members of security, quiet men in suits who knew how to be present without creating a scene. "Marcus," Daniel said, "we do this respectfully." Marcus nodded. "We'll keep it quiet." Daniel paused at the doorway. "And we do not let this spill onto the Johnsons." Marcus's face stayed steady. "Understood." They started with Marcus. Marcus Klein arrived in the building as if nothing had changed, like a man who believed charm could rewrite reality. He wore a crisp suit, carried a leather portfolio, and offered a faint smile to the receptionist that didn't reach his eyes. When security escorted him to the conference room, he glanced around once, quick and sharp, mapping exits. Daniel didn't sit when Marcus entered. He stood behind the table, hands relaxed at his sides. Marcus offered a practiced laugh. "Daniel, I assume this is about the misunderstanding last night." Daniel held his gaze. "It wasn't a misunderstanding." Marcus's smile faltered just slightly. "Rebecca is overreacting. Lawyers tend to." "This isn't about Rebecca," Daniel said. "This is about the contract." Marcus sighed softly, as if inconvenienced. "I translated what was needed for the flow of negotiation. German legal language can be..." Daniel slid the suspension notice across the table. Marcus stared at it. The color drained from his face the way it had drained the night before. "You can't be serious," Marcus said quietly. Daniel's voice stayed even. "You're suspended pending investigation. Your access to company systems is revoked. You will not contact any staff member, any vendor, or any party related to this deal." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Based on the word of a child?" Daniel's eyes hardened. "Based on security footage, document discrepancies, and a professional witness who overheard you. The child is not the evidence. She was the alarm." Marcus's hands curled into fists, then flattened again as he tried to regain control. "This will ruin my career." Daniel's expression didn't soften. "You made that decision." Marcus leaned forward, voice lowering. "Daniel, if you do this, you will create a scandal that will hurt shareholders, employees." Daniel interrupted, not loud, just final. "You're not here to advise me." A long silence stretched. Marcus swallowed. "Who put you up to this?" Daniel looked at him with something close to disappointment. "You still think this is about manipulation," he said softly. "It's about truth." Marcus's eyes flicked toward the door. Marcus Reed stepped forward slightly. Not threatening, just present. Marcus stood stiffly. "Fine," he said. "Suspend me. But you'll learn you're making a mistake." Daniel watched him walk out, escorted. He didn't feel triumph. He felt grief, because betrayal was always, at its core, the death of a belief. Then came Ethan. Ethan Cole entered the conference room with a different energy than Marcus had. Marcus had arrived with charm. Ethan arrived with offense. He didn't sit. He didn't smile. "Daniel," he said, voice tight. "This is ridiculous." Daniel remained standing. "Sit down, Ethan." Ethan hesitated. Then he sat, but only because refusing would look guilty. Rebecca sat to Daniel's right, tablet open. Marcus stood near the door like a shadow with manners. Daniel placed the suspension notice on the table. Ethan's eyes flashed. "This is because of that child," Ethan said. "A little girl doesn't even understand what she heard." Daniel's voice stayed calm. "That little girl understood enough to stop you." Ethan's nostrils flared. "I've dedicated 6 years to you. I've protected your time, your schedule, your reputation, and you're going to throw me away over an accusation." "It's not an accusation," Rebecca cut in, crisp and controlled. "It's evidence." Ethan looked at her like she betrayed him personally. Rebecca continued. "We have video footage of you handing Mr. Klein a document folder in the corridor outside the restroom. We have access logs showing you entered legal document storage late at night. We have financial attempts to authorize payments to shell vendors. This is not a misunderstanding." Ethan's face changed. Just for a fraction of a second, the mask slipped, and something colder showed through. Then it was gone. Ethan leaned back. "You're making assumptions." Daniel's voice lowered. "Ethan, I want you to answer one question." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What? Why Doraville?" Daniel asked. Ethan froze. The room went quiet enough to hear the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. Ethan recovered quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about." Daniel watched him closely. "You were tracked today," he said evenly. "You made calls that weren't logged through standard systems. You switched vehicles." Ethan's eyes flashed with anger now. "You had me followed?" Daniel nodded once. "Yes." Ethan laughed, sharp. "So now you're paranoid." Daniel didn't react to the insult. "No," he said. "I'm responsible." Ethan leaned forward, voice low and dangerous in its calm. "You can suspend me. You can ruin me. But you can't unring a bell, Daniel. People will talk. Your staff will talk. Your investors will talk. You think you can keep this quiet?" Rebecca's gaze was ice. "We're not trying to keep it quiet. We're trying to keep it honest." Ethan's eyes flicked briefly toward Marcus at the door, then back to Daniel. "I want legal representation." "You'll have it," Daniel said. "You're suspended pending investigation. Your access is revoked. Security will escort you out." Ethan stood abruptly, chair scraping. Before he left, he leaned in slightly, voice so low it felt like a private threat. "Be careful who you make a hero," he murmured. "Heroes make good targets." Daniel's blood ran cold. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He let Ethan walk out under escort. When the door closed, Daniel exhaled slowly. Rebecca looked at him. "He's thinking about the Johnsons." Daniel's voice was quiet. "So am I." Marcus spoke from the door. "We'll tighten coverage." Daniel nodded once. His hands clenched briefly at his sides, then relaxed. He walked back to his desk and stared at the city beyond the glass. He had suspended 2 men, but suspending them didn't erase the damage they could still do. Because the most dangerous part of betrayal wasn't the clause in a contract. It was the desperation of someone who realized the lie had been exposed. And in Daniel's mind, Annie's small voice returned again, not as a memory now, but as a warning. "The interpreter is hiding something," Daniel whispered to himself, barely audible, like a vow. "And I won't hide from what comes next." Sunday morning in Southwest Atlanta had its own rhythm. It wasn't the rhythm of boardrooms or rooftop restaurants. It was slower, steadier, built on routine and resilience. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and fryer oil from somebody's kitchen. A neighbor's screen door slapped shut. Somewhere, a gospel station played low through a cracked window. Loretta Mae Johnson stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, fastening a simple pearl necklace she'd owned since her 40s. The pearls weren't expensive, but they had history. Loretta believed history mattered. Annie sat on the bed swinging her legs, shoes already on even though Loretta had told her 3 times to wait. "Grandma," Annie asked, voice quiet, "are we still going to church if those men are mad?" Loretta paused, looking at her granddaughter's reflection. "We're going to church," Loretta said firmly. "We don't skip prayer because somebody else chose to do wrong." Annie nodded, but her brow stayed knit. Loretta picked up Annie's yellow ribbons from the dresser and tied them carefully at the ends of her braids. Annie looked more put together than most grown folks at the grocery store, and Loretta liked it that way. In Loretta's mind, showing up neat was a form of self-respect in a world that often tried to strip it from you. When they stepped outside, Loretta noticed the same dark SUV across the lot. Different spot. Same quiet presence. The man leaning near it was not the same one from Friday night, but the nod was the same. Polite. Professional. Not friendly. Annie noticed too. "That's them," Annie whispered. Loretta squeezed her hand. "Eyes forward, baby." They drove to New Hope Baptist, the church Loretta had attended since before Annie was born. The parking lot was already filling up. Women in hats, men in pressed suits, kids running between cars until a grandmother voice snapped them back into line. Loretta pulled into a spot near the side entrance. Before she could cut the engine, she saw the dark SUV roll into the lot and park 2 rows away, half hidden behind a van with a choir sticker on the window. So they really are watching, Loretta thought, and as much as it offended her pride, it also steadied her heart. Inside the church, the air was cool and smelled faintly of old wood, perfume, and Sunday cologne. The choir was warming up, voices rising and falling like waves. A deacon shook Loretta's hand at the door. "Mornin', Sister Johnson," he said warmly. "How's that grandbaby?" Loretta smiled. "She's good." "Annie, say good morning." "Good morning," Annie said, voice small but polite. An older woman in a wide-brimmed hat, Mrs. Edna Freeman, leaned in and pinched Annie's cheek gently. "Look at you," Mrs. Freeman said, growing like a weed. "You keeping your grandma out of trouble?" Annie's eyes flicked to Loretta. Loretta answered for her. "She's keeping me honest. That's what she's doing." Mrs. Freeman laughed. "Lord, we all need that." Loretta guided Annie into their usual pew, 3rd row on the left. Familiar faces nodded hello. A few people hugged Loretta with the long embrace of folks who had seen her through losses and kept showing up anyway. But Loretta felt the whispering before she heard it. It floated behind smiles. It traveled faster than hymnals. Something happened at that restaurant. That baby spoke up. "Billionaire man." "Police." Loretta kept her face calm. She had lived long enough to know gossip was a kind of weather. It passed when you didn't feed it. The service began. The choir sang, "Precious Lord, take my hand." And Loretta felt her chest tighten. It was an old song. A song for people who had buried parents and survived layoffs and kept walking. A song for people who understood that sometimes you didn't ask for strength, you asked for help getting through the next hour. Annie leaned against Loretta's side, her small body warm, her eyes drifting toward the stained glass. When the pastor, Reverend Harold Bishop, stepped to the pulpit, the room quieted in that special way only churches could manage, hundreds of people settling into a shared silence. His sermon was about integrity, about the quiet choices no one applauded. Loretta felt like the words were aimed straight at her pew. "Some folks think integrity is what you post," Reverend Bishop said, voice deep and steady. "But integrity is what you do when nobody's watching. And sometimes, church, God lets a child see what grown folks choose to ignore." A murmur ran through the congregation. Loretta didn't look around. She kept her eyes on the pulpit, but she could feel eyes on her. Annie sat up straighter. After the benediction, people lingered in clusters, talking, laughing, asking about one another's health like it was sacred work. Loretta tried to guide Annie toward the door, but Reverend Bishop intercepted them gently. "Sister Johnson," he said, smiling kindly. "Can I have a word?" Loretta's stomach tightened. "Yes, Reverend." He crouched slightly to Annie's level. "And this must be Annie." Annie nodded. "Your grandma tells me you're a smart young lady." Annie glanced at Loretta, then back at the pastor. "I like books," she said. Reverend Bishop smiled. "Books are good. Truth is better." Loretta swallowed. "So he knows." Reverend Bishop stood again, his voice lowered so it didn't carry. "I won't ask you for details," he said to Loretta. "That's your business. But I will say this." Loretta's jaw tightened. "I don't want attention." "I know," Reverend Bishop said gently. "But attention comes when light hits a dark thing. It's not always comfortable." Loretta looked down at Annie. Annie's small hand slipped into hers, as if she sensed the grown-up tension. Reverend Bishop continued, "If you need anything, rides, meals, someone to sit with you this church, don't just pray. We show up." Loretta's eyes stung. "Thank you," he nodded. "And tell that baby something for me." Loretta looked at Annie. "What? Reverend?" Reverend Bishop smiled at Annie. Tell her that courage doesn't always look like a grown man with a microphone. Annie blinked, then gave a shy smile. Outside, the parking lot was bright with sunlight and loud with conversation. Loretta ushered Annie toward the car. She could feel the eyes, the curiosity. She could also feel something else. Support, community, people who remembered what it was like to have little and still choose right. As Loretta opened the car door, Mrs. Freeman hurried over with a foil-covered plate. "Don't argue with me," Mrs. Freeman said before Loretta could refuse. "Fried chicken, greens, cornbread. You look like you've been carrying something heavy." Loretta's throat tightened. "Edna, hush," Mrs. Freeman said, pressing the plate into Loretta's hands. "We feed our own." Annie peeked at the plate. "Can I have cornbread now?" Mrs. Freeman laughed. "Baby, you can have cornbread whenever you want." Loretta smiled despite herself. On the drive home, Annie watched the neighborhood pass kids on bikes, a man washing his car, a woman watering potted plants on her porch. "Grandma," Annie said softly. "The pastor said light hits dark things." Loretta kept her eyes on the road. "Yes, baby. Does that mean the bad people can see us now?" Loretta's hands tightened on the steering wheel. For a moment, she wanted to lie. She wanted to say no. Everything is fine. Go back to being 6. But Loretta didn't raise Annie on lies. "It means," Loretta said carefully, "some people might notice you did something brave. And brave scares people who like to hide." Annie was quiet. Then she said, "But we got church." Loretta swallowed hard. "Yes, we do." When they pulled into the apartment complex, the dark SUV was still there. As if the city itself had assigned a shadow. Loretta carried the foil plate upstairs, Annie bouncing beside her. Inside, Loretta set the food on the counter and looked at her granddaughter. "You hungry?" she asked. Annie nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Loretta smiled faintly. "Wash your hands." As Annie ran to the sink, Loretta stood in the small kitchen and let the weight of the week settle. The world had noticed them, but so had their people. And that, Loretta realized, was the difference between being afraid and being alone. Monday morning arrived with the kind of bright, clean sunlight that made Atlanta look innocent. At Whitmore Tech, nothing felt innocent anymore. Daniel Whitmore stood in the executive conference room on the 27th floor with Rebecca Sloan and Marcus Reed. The room smelled like fresh coffee and polished wood. The view outside was all glass and skyline, the kind of view that could fool a man into believing he was above the mess. On the table lay a slim folder marked Internal, Ethan Cole. Inside were still images from the hallway camera, badge logs, shell vendor payment attempts, and the one detail that turned suspicion into certainty. A timeline showing Ethan accessed legal document storage minutes before Marcus downloaded the final German revisions. Rebecca placed her pen down. "Financial Crimes has accepted the referral," she said. "They're assigning agents." Quietly at first. Daniel nodded once. "Good." Marcus shifted his weight near the door. "Ethan's attorney called. Wants to negotiate severance." Daniel let out a low breath through his nose. "Severance," he repeated, as if tasting the word. Rebecca's eyes hardened. "He's trying to buy a clean exit." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He walked to the window and stared at the city below. People were driving to work, dropping kids at school, buying gas, living ordinary lives. None of them knew an executive assistant was attempting to steal control of a technology company using language as a weapon. Daniel turned back. "Bring him in," he said. Rebecca's brow lifted slightly. Now, Daniel repeated. "Before he builds a story." Marcus nodded and stepped out. 2 minutes later, Ethan Cole walked in flanked by security. He looked composed again. Suit sharp, tie straight, expression controlled. He carried himself like someone who still believed he belonged in the room. Daniel didn't sit. Ethan glanced around, eyes moving from Daniel to Rebecca to Marcus, as if calculating which angle would work best. "Daniel," Ethan said, voice calm and offended. "This has gone too far." Daniel gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit." Ethan sat. Rebecca remained silent, tablet open, her posture a quiet warning. Daniel folded his hands on the table. "Ethan, I'm going to ask you one question." "One." Ethan leaned back slightly. "I've already requested representation." "This isn't a deposition," Daniel said evenly. "It's a chance." Ethan's jaw flexed. Daniel slid a still image across the table. It showed Ethan handing Marcus a folder outside the restroom hallway. Time-stamped. Clear. Ethan's eyes flicked to it and back up. That proves nothing. Daniel slid the next page. Badge logs. Then the vendor payment attempt. Then the call forwarding trace. Ethan's composure held, but only barely. What do you want? Ethan asked, voice flatter now. Daniel's gaze stayed steady. The truth. Ethan laughed softly, but it sounded wrong in the room. Truth. Daniel, you built this company on strategy, on leverage. Don't pretend you're above the game. Daniel's voice lowered. I'm not above it. I'm responsible for what happens in it. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Responsible? For what? Hiring people who can actually operate in the real world? Rebecca spoke for the first time. You attempted to authorize a payment to a shell vendor. You coordinated unauthorized access to contract drafts. You facilitated material misrepresentation in an international transaction. Ethan stared at her. You sound like a press release. Rebecca's expression didn't change. I sound like federal charges. Ethan's nostrils flared. Then he turned back to Daniel, choosing a softer tone, the tone he used when he wanted sympathy. Daniel, he said, I've protected you. I've handled things you didn't want to see. You think it's easy running a company this size? You think people don't circle like sharks? Daniel's eyes sharpened. Is that your justification? Ethan leaned forward slightly. My justification is survival. You don't know what it's like to have nothing. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. You don't know what it's like to build something with nothing and still refuse to steal. Ethan's face hardened. You're sitting in a glass tower talking about morality. You got lucky. Daniel's gaze went cold. No, he said quietly. I got warned. Ethan blinked. Daniel continued. A 6-year-old girl walked into a room full of grown men and stopped you. Ethan's lips curled slightly. That child shouldn't have been in the room. Rebecca's voice cut in. That child was in the room because her grandmother cleans floors to pay rent. Ethan flicked his eyes to Rebecca as if annoyed she'd brought class into it. Daniel watched him closely. It was subtle, but in that flick of annoyance was the core of Ethan's worldview. People like Loretta and Annie existed to serve, not to matter. Daniel leaned forward. You told Marcus I don't read German, Daniel said softly. You handed him papers in English. You planned to let me sign away control of my company at a discount and call it strategy. Ethan's smile returned, thin as wire. You would have survived. Daniel's voice dropped. Would Annie? The room went still. Ethan's eyes flashed. Why are we talking about the Johnsons? Daniel didn't blink. Because you made them part of it when you chose to threaten them. Ethan's jaw tightened. I didn't threaten anyone. Marcus, who had been silent until now, stepped forward and placed a printed transcript on the table, a note from security. Ethan's parting words to Daniel after suspension. Be careful who you make a hero. Heroes make good targets. Ethan stared at it. For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed his face. Daniel's tone remained even. You said that for a reason. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. Rebecca leaned forward slightly, voice professional, relentless. Ethan, federal investigators are now involved. If you have any intention of mitigating what happens next, you will stop any contact with the Johnsons immediately, and you will cooperate. Ethan's eyes turned sharp again. Cooperate with what? Your narrative. Daniel stood slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Ethan, Daniel said. You're done. Ethan stood too, anger breaking through control. You think you're some kind of righteous man because you listened to a child. Daniel, you're going to lose people. You're going to lose loyalty. You're going to learn what this really costs. Daniel met his gaze without flinching. I already know what it costs, Daniel said quietly. It costs trust. It costs sleep. It costs dignity. When you realize you almost signed away your own work because you didn't want to look paranoid. He stepped closer. But here's what it also costs, Daniel continued, voice low and precise. It costs you. Ethan's face tightened. Then he laughed again, bitter now. You'll regret this. Daniel's expression didn't change. No, he said. I'll regret who you chose to become. Marcus opened the door. 2 federal agents stood in the hallway, plain clothes, badges not flashing, faces neutral. They didn't look like television. They looked like paperwork turned into people. Ethan's laugh died in his throat. Rebecca didn't gloat. She only said, Mr. Cole, please step outside. Ethan looked at Daniel one last time, searching for hesitation. He found none. As Ethan was escorted out, Daniel exhaled slowly and sat back down. The room felt quieter, but not lighter. Rebecca gathered her tablet. "That was clean," she said softly. Daniel stared at the empty chair where Ethan had sat. "It wasn't clean," Daniel replied. "It was necessary." Marcus closed the door and looked at Daniel. "We'll keep eyes on the Johnsons." Daniel nodded once. Outside the window, Atlanta glittered in the sunlight, still pretending. Inside, a betrayal had finally met its consequence, and Daniel Whitmore understood something with painful clarity. Justice isn't loud, it's patient, but when it arrives, it has to be real. By Tuesday morning, the story had escaped the walls of Whitmore Tech, not in full detail, not with names and documents and neat explanations. Scandal rarely arrived neat. It arrived in fragments, whispers turned into speculation. Speculation turned into headlines that had just enough truth to feel credible. A local business blog ran the first piece. Whitmore Tech delays major foreign equity deal amid internal review. By lunchtime, a national outlet followed with something sharper. CEO halts transaction. Sources cite possible internal misconduct. Daniel Whitmore read both headlines without changing his expression. He sat in his office with Rebecca Sloan and his head of communications, Melanie Price, a woman in her late 50s who had spent decades shaping stories for companies that liked to believe they were the heroes of their own narrative. Melanie laid a printed copy of the article on the conference table. She didn't slam it down. She didn't dramatize it. She simply placed it there like a doctor laying out a lab report. "They don't have Ethan's name," she said. "Not yet." Rebecca nodded. Federal kept it quiet. Melanie looked at Daniel. "But the word misconduct invites imagination. Investors hate imagination." Daniel's gaze stayed steady. "What do you recommend?" Melanie took a breath. A short statement. No defensiveness. No over-explaining. "You say you paused a deal due to discrepancies discovered in the final review, and you initiated an independent investigation. You emphasize accountability and cooperation with authorities. Then you stop talking," Rebecca added. "Anything beyond that risks contaminating the investigation." Daniel nodded once. "Do it." Melanie hesitated. "There's another issue." Daniel's eyes sharpened. "Go on." Melanie lowered her voice, not because anyone could hear, but because she understood weight. "People are asking how you discovered the discrepancy." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "We're not discussing that." Melanie nodded. "Agreed. But internally, staff are talking. Someone in the restaurant heard something. A server. A child. Those details are floating." Daniel's expression hardened slightly. "Who is floating them?" Melanie flipped a page. "No single source. But gossip spreads when it has a moral center. People want to believe someone brave stopped a crime." Rebecca's tone was firm. "And people want a face. A name." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "Annie. Loretta." He spoke carefully. "We keep them out of it." Melanie nodded. "I agree. But keep them out requires action, not hope. I can send a confidential company-wide note emphasizing non-retaliation and reminding staff that discussing private details could compromise a federal investigation." Rebecca nodded. "Do it. And add a line about respecting the privacy of individuals not employed by the company." Daniel said, "And if I hear even a whisper of someone trying to contact them." Marcus Reed appeared at the door as if summoned by Daniel's tone. He didn't interrupt. He waited. Daniel looked at him. "Marcus." Marcus stepped in. "Yes, sir. Any movement near the Johnsons?" Marcus shook his head. "Nothing direct. We've kept the presence quiet." "No one's approached their building?" Rebecca asked. "Any online chatter with their names?" Marcus replied, "Not yet. But people are looking. You can feel it." Daniel exhaled slowly. "We stay ahead of it." Melanie gathered her papers. "I'll coordinate with legal. Release goes out within the hour." After she left, Rebecca remained seated, watching Daniel with the steady gaze of someone who knew he carried more than business pressure. She had seen men crumble under the wrong kind of responsibility. She'd also seen men grow. "This is the part people don't understand," Rebecca said quietly. "You're doing the right thing, and it still costs you." Daniel's mouth tightened. "I can handle cost." Rebecca's voice softened. "Not just financial. Emotional. Reputation. Trust." Daniel looked toward the window. Midtown was bright, clean, busy. A man crossed the street holding a cardboard tray of coffees like his life depended on delivering them without spilling. A woman in her 60s walked slowly beside a friend, both laughing at something small and private. Daniel said quietly, "I used to think trust was built by being smart." Rebecca didn't speak. Daniel continued, "Now I think it's built by being accountable, even when you could hide." Rebecca nodded once. "That's what separates a company from a cult of personality." Daniel turned back. "And that's what Ethan didn't understand." Rebecca stood, gathering her tablet. "Federal agents will want another interview this afternoon." Daniel nodded. "I'll be there." When she left, Daniel sat alone for a moment. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out the small notebook he'd written in the day before. Truth costs. So does silence. He stared at the words and thought about the temptation that had come with this moment. To craft a heroic narrative, to polish a moral story, to frame himself as the CEO who stopped corruption. It would play well. It would calm investors. It would inspire employees, and it would put a target on a 6-year-old girl's back. Daniel closed the notebook and locked it away. Then he picked up his phone and called Marcus Reed. "Marcus," he said, "I want a privacy shield." "Digital," Marcus replied immediately. "Already speaking with a firm. They'll monitor public databases and remove any accessible information tied to Annie and Loretta." "Good," Daniel said. "And the restaurant staff?" Marcus paused. "Camila is nervous. She's worried management will push her out." Daniel's jaw tightened. Camila told the truth, and truth tellers are expensive, Marcus said quietly. Daniel leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked softly. "I'm going to call the restaurant owner," Daniel said. Marcus hesitated. That could draw attention. Daniel's voice stayed calm. "So does injustice." He ended the call and dialed a number he'd gotten from Rebecca. The owner answered on the third ring, voice polished and wary. "Mr. Whitmore," the man said. "What can I do for you?" Daniel didn't waste words. "You will not retaliate against your staff," Daniel said evenly. "Not against Loretta Johnson, not against Camila, not against anyone who cooperated in a federal investigation." A pause. The owner's voice grew tight. "Of course not. We would never." "Good," Daniel said. "Because if you do, I will make sure every corporate client I have hears about it." Silence. Then the owner said, "Understood." Daniel hung up, set the phone down, and exhaled. He didn't enjoy threats. He didn't enjoy leverage. But he understood something now that he had forgotten in the comfort of wealth. Power, if it meant anything, was supposed to protect the vulnerable. A knock came at his door. Denise, his longtime executive assistant newly reassigned into the gap Ethan had left, stepped in with a look that was gentle but firm. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "your two is here." Daniel stood. "Send them in." 2 federal agents entered. Calm faces, neutral eyes. The kind of people who could talk about fraud while thinking about what they'd cook for dinner. They sat across from him. "Mr. Whitmore," one agent said, "we need you to walk us through the timeline again." Daniel nodded. As he spoke, he kept his voice steady, factual. He didn't embellish. He didn't perform. But inside, another story ran alongside the timeline, one that never appeared in official reports. A child in yellow ribbons. A grandmother with tired hands. A water bottle held like a shield. Daniel answered every question, signed every paper they placed in front of him, and watched the machinery of justice begin to turn. When the agents left, Daniel sat alone again. The building hummed. The city moved. The news cycle spun. And somewhere across town, a little girl was reading her books, and a grandmother was trying to keep a household steady. Daniel stared at the skyline and whispered, almost like a prayer he wasn't used to saying, "Let this end with them safe." Loretta Mae Johnson tried to keep Monday night normal. She warmed up Mrs. Freeman's leftover fried chicken in the oven so it stayed crisp instead of soggy. She boiled green beans with a little smoked turkey like her sister used to do when money was tight but pride was intact. She set cornbread on the table and told Annie to say grace the way she always did. Annie bowed her head, eyes squeezed shut with seriousness that belonged to someone much older. "Dear God," she whispered, "thank you for Grandma. Thank you for food. Thank you for keeping us safe. And please help Mr. Whitmore not be sad." "Amen." Loretta's throat tightened. She pretended to adjust a napkin so Annie wouldn't see the shine in her eyes. After dinner, Annie sat on the living room rug with her picture books. Loretta folded laundry with the television on low, more for company than information. The news anchor's voice drifted over them, talk of traffic, weather, then a quick segment about business. "Whitmore Tech delays international deal after internal review." Loretta reached for the remote and lowered the volume further. Annie looked up anyway. "That's him," she said. Loretta nodded. "Yes, baby." "Is he in trouble?" Loretta chose her words the way she chose her battles. "He's dealing with trouble." Annie frowned. "Because of the bad men." Loretta folded a towel carefully. "Because of the choices the bad men made." A knock sounded at the door. Loretta froze, towel half folded in her hands. The knock came again, firm, not aggressive. The kind of knock that belonged to someone who expected to be answered. Annie sat up on the rug. "Grandma?" Loretta's heart began to pound in a steady rhythm she didn't like. She walked to the door without turning off the lights. Darkness made fear louder. She looked through the peephole. Two men stood outside. Both looked like they could be anyone in Atlanta. No uniforms, no weapons visible, no dramatic posture. One was older, salt and pepper hair, kind eyes. The other was younger, broad-shouldered, scanning the hallway quietly. The older man held up a phone and angled it toward the peephole. On the screen was a message. Marcus Reed, Whitmore Security. Loretta exhaled, but she didn't unlock the door yet. "Mrs. Johnson," the older man said through the wood, voice low and respectful. "My name is Walter. I'm with Mr. Whitmore's security team. Mr. Reed asked me to stop by, just to check in." Loretta kept her voice steady. "Is something wrong?" "No, ma'am," Walter replied. "Not that we know of. We're just making sure you feel safe." Loretta's pride flared. She didn't want men outside her door. She didn't want to feel like a target in her own home. But she also remembered Ethan's last words, "Heroes make good targets." And she remembered that fear didn't protect children. Preparation did. Loretta unlocked the chain and opened the door a few inches. Walter smiled gently, not too wide. "Evening." The younger man gave a short nod and stayed quiet. Loretta looked past them. The hallway was empty. Walter said, "Mr. Reed wanted you to know there's been no movement. No one has tried to contact you. But the news is starting to pick up, and that can make desperate people do desperate things." Loretta's jaw tightened. "Are you saying somebody might come here?" Walter's voice remained calm. "I'm saying we'd rather be cautious than sorry." Annie appeared behind Loretta, peeking around her hip. Walter's expression softened. "That must be Annie." Annie nodded, cautious. "Hi," she said. Walter lowered himself slightly, speaking gently but not like she was foolish. "Hi, Annie. You doing okay tonight?" Annie glanced up at Loretta, then back at Walter. "Yes, sir." Walter nodded. "Good. If you ever feel scared, you tell your grandma right away, all right?" Annie nodded solemnly. Walter straightened. "We'll be nearby tonight. Same as before. If you need anything, you call this number." He held out a small card. Loretta took it. "Thank you." Walter tipped his head. "Yes, ma'am." The two men walked away, footsteps quiet on the carpet. Loretta closed the door, locked it, then leaned her forehead against it for a moment. Annie touched her hand. "Grandma, are those good guys?" Loretta turned, crouched down, and looked into Annie's face. "They're here to help," Loretta said. "But we still stay smart." Annie nodded, then returned to her books as if the visit was just another adult thing. Loretta tried to go back to folding laundry, but her hands weren't steady. She kept listening to the building sounds, the elevator, a door closing, a television somewhere down the hall. Then her phone rang. Loretta flinched. Unknown number. Her stomach tightened. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Unknown numbers had never brought her anything good. It rang again. Loretta answered, voice cautious. "Hello? Mrs. Johnson," a man's voice said, calm and measured. "This is Daniel Whitmore." Loretta's breath caught. She glanced toward Annie, who looked up at the sound of Loretta's tone changing. Loretta stepped into the kitchen and lowered her voice. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry to call you at home," Daniel said. "But I wanted to check on you personally." Loretta swallowed. "We're all right. Annie's all right." A pause. Then Daniel asked, "Has anyone contacted you? Anyone from the restaurant? Anyone you don't recognize?" "No," Loretta said. "Your security came by." "Good," Daniel replied. "I didn't want that to surprise you." Loretta hesitated, then said what she needed to say. "Mr. Whitmore, my granddaughter is 6 years old. She didn't ask to be part of any of this." "I know," Daniel said quietly, "and I won't let her pay for telling the truth." Loretta held the phone tighter. "People talk. They always do." "I'm aware," Daniel said. "That's why I'm calling. Not as your employer, Not as a businessman, just as a man who owes you and your granddaughter a debt. Loretta's pride rose again. You don't owe me. Yes, Daniel interrupted gently. I do. His voice softened. You raised a child to have a conscience. That conscience saved me. Loretta's eyes stung. She blinked hard. I just did my best. Daniel's voice carried something heavier now, fatigue, humility, and a kind of quiet respect. My mother cleaned houses, he said. She did her best too. She taught me that dignity isn't something money gives you. It's something you keep. Loretta's throat tightened. She could picture it now, Daniel as a boy, watching his mother come home tired, still standing tall. It didn't make him family, but it made him human. Annie's voice floated from the living room. Grandma? Who is it? Loretta covered the phone briefly. It's Mr. Whitmore, baby. Annie scrambled up, feet pattering toward the kitchen. Loretta uncovered the phone again. She wants to say hello. Put her on, Daniel said. Loretta handed the phone to Annie. Annie held it with both hands like it was delicate. Hello? Annie said. Hello, Annie. Daniel replied. His voice sounded different now, still controlled, but gentler. Less CEO, more person. How are you doing? Annie thought carefully. I'm okay. I'm glad, Daniel said. I wanted to thank you again. Annie's brow furrowed. For telling? Yes, Daniel said. For telling. Annie hesitated, then asked the question that lived in her like a pebble in a shoe. Are you mad at me? Daniel's answer came without hesitation. No, I'm proud of you. Annie's eyes widened. Loretta felt her own heart squeeze. Daniel continued. I was shocked when you spoke, Annie, but I'm grateful you did. Annie nodded as if he could see it. Grandma says, good people don't stay quiet. Daniel exhaled softly. Your grandma is right. Annie's voice grew smaller. Are the bad men going to hurt you? Loretta's breath caught. She hadn't realized Annie was carrying that fear too. Daniel paused. Not long, just enough to respect the question. No, he said firmly. They won't. Annie blinked. How do you know? Daniel's voice turned steady, adult, reassuring in the way older generations expected from a man making a promise. Because I'm going to make sure of it, he said. And because you're not alone. Annie looked up at Loretta, then back at the phone. Okay. Daniel's tone softened again. Annie? Yes, sir. You did something most adults don't do, Daniel said. You told the truth when it was hard. Annie swallowed. It was scary. I know, Daniel replied. But you did it anyway. That's the part that matters. Annie handed the phone back to Loretta like she was done carrying something heavy. Loretta put it to her ear. She's a good child, Loretta said quietly. I can see that, Daniel answered. Mrs. Johnson, I'll keep this simple. If anything changes anything, you call Marcus Reed or you call me. Day or night. Loretta hesitated. You want me to call you? Yes, Daniel said, because this is my responsibility. Loretta felt the weight of those words. Responsibility spoken like a grown man meant it, not like a slogan. All right, she said softly. I will. Daniel paused, then said, and Mrs. Johnson, yes? Thank you for not raising a child who stays quiet, Daniel said. Loretta's eyes filled. She looked at Annie, who had returned to her book, calm again. Loretta swallowed. You're welcome, Mr. Whitmore. When the call ended, Loretta stood in her kitchen for a long moment, phone still in her hand. Outside, the hallway was quiet. Inside, Annie turned a page and whispered words to herself as she read. Loretta realized something that surprised her. For the first time since Friday, she felt a little less afraid. Not because danger was gone, but because someone with power had chosen to stand between that danger and her child. And in America, that choice, rare as it was, still meant something. Tuesday arrived with a quiet kind of cold front, nothing dramatic, just a sharper breeze and a sky that looked rinsed clean. Loretta Mae Johnson walked Annie to school like she always did, holding her hand across the parking lot, reminding her to look both ways even when the crossing guard was standing right there. Loretta believed in doing things the right way even when the world provided shortcuts. Annie's teacher, Mrs. Pottle, greeted them at the classroom door with her steady smile. Good morning, Annie. Good morning, Miss Johnson, she said. Loretta nodded politely. Morning. Mrs. Patel hesitated, her eyes softening. Annie's been mentioned, she said gently, choosing her words like Loretta did. Some parents were talking at pickup yesterday. I told them we don't spread stories about children. Loretta's jaw tightened. Thank you. Mrs. Patel lowered her voice further. If you want Annie to eat lunch in my classroom for a day or two just while things settle, I can do that. Loretta's pride flared, immediate and stubborn. Then she thought of Annie's small face the first time she asked, "Are we in trouble?" Pride didn't protect a child's peace. Loretta nodded once. "Maybe just today. Thank you." Annie glanced between them. "Am I in trouble?" Mrs. Patel crouched slightly. "No, sweetheart. You're safe here." Annie nodded and walked inside, backpack bouncing. Loretta stood in the hallway for a beat after the door closed, listening to the sound of children talking ordinary, bright, untouched by boardrooms and contracts. She wanted to keep Annie inside that ordinary world as long as possible. When Loretta returned to her car, she noticed the dark SUV parked across the street. Different spot, same presence. She didn't look directly at it. She didn't want Annie's classmates noticing a security detail and turning her granddaughter into a headline. Loretta got into her Buick and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel, breathing. Then her phone buzzed. "Denise?" From Daniel Whitmore's office, Loretta answered carefully. "Hello? Mrs. Johnson," Denise said warmly. "I hope you're doing well. Mr. Whitmore asked me to let you know he'd like to finalize the education stipend paperwork today. If you have time, it can be done electronically or in person, whatever is easiest." Loretta glanced at the dashboard clock. She was supposed to be at the restaurant by 5 for her shift, though she suspected the manager would be watching her like a problem he didn't know how to solve. "In person is fine," Loretta said slowly. "If it's quick, it will be respectful of your time," Denise replied. "We can meet at 2. 0 inches, a small conference room. No press, no fuss." Loretta hesitated. "And this won't put Annie's name out there." Denise's voice turned firm in a gentle way. "No, ma'am. Mr. Whitmore is very clear about privacy." Loretta exhaled. "All right. I'll be there." At 1:30, Raymond arrived again in the black sedan. Loretta climbed in alone this time, her purse clutched close. The envelope from last week was inside. Along with Annie's birth certificate copy, Loretta had learned to bring documentation to any meeting that involved paperwork, because America loved proof more than it loved people. The ride to Midtown felt different without Annie's small voice in the backseat. The city seemed louder, more complicated. Loretta watched the corporate towers rise and felt that familiar mix of resentment and awe. Raymond glanced at her in the mirror. "You doing all right, ma'am?" Loretta gave a small nod. "I'm doing." Raymond didn't push. That restraint was its own kindness. At Whitmore Tech, Denise escorted Loretta to the same small conference room, not the grand boardroom. Daniel Whitmore stood when she entered, as he had before. Loretta appreciated that. Older folks noticed manners. Not because they were fancy, but because they were a way of saying, "I see you, Mrs. Johnson," Daniel said. "Thank you for coming." Loretta nodded. "Mr. Whitmore," he gestured to a chair. "Please." On the table lay a folder, a pen, and a small tray with coffee and a plate of lemon cookies. Loretta's eyes flicked to the cookies. She thought of church ladies who always brought something sweet when life turned bitter. Daniel sat across from her, posture composed, eyes tired. "How is Annie?" he asked. Loretta's voice softened despite herself. "She's all right. She's at school." Daniel nodded. "Good. That's where she should be." There was a pause, one with weight, the kind of pause older adults recognized as respect. Daniel slid the folder toward her. "This is the formal scholarship setup. It's structured as an educational trust that can only be used for Annie's schooling, tutoring, books, college later. No taxes for you to manage. No publicity. No obligation." Loretta did not touch it yet. Her instincts, honed by decades of being offered help that came with hidden hooks, kept her cautious. "Why?" she asked quietly. Daniel didn't flinch. "Because my company benefited from her honesty," he said. "And because the world shouldn't punish a child for doing what adults were afraid to do." Loretta studied him. "People do charity for applause," she said, voice low. "You said this isn't charity." "It isn't," Daniel replied. "It's responsibility." Loretta's throat tightened. She looked down at the folder again. "And the medical bills?" she asked before she could stop herself, thinking of how easily one emergency could break a household. She hadn't meant to bring it up. Pride hated need, but fear loved practical questions. Daniel's expression softened. "I had Denise ask discreetly," he said, "if you have any outstanding medical debt tied to Annie's care." "It's not Annie." Loretta corrected. It's mine. Blood pressure. And my knees. And a dental bill I've been ignoring like it'll disappear. Daniel nodded, not judging. I want to cover those, he said. Through a third-party payment. Quietly, Loretta's spine stiffened. Mr. Whitmore. Daniel lifted a hand, gentle. Mrs. Johnson, I understand dignity. I do. I'm not offering this because I think you can't survive without it. I'm offering it because you shouldn't have to survive on sacrifice forever. Loretta's eyes stung. She remembered being 35, choosing between filling a prescription and buying school shoes. She remembered pretending she wasn't hungry so her kids could eat. She remembered telling herself, this is just what people like us do. And now a man with more money than her whole family line had ever touched was looking at her like her struggle wasn't invisible. Loretta swallowed. You don't know me. Daniel's voice was quiet. I know enough. I know you raised a child to tell the truth. That tells me a lot. Loretta stared at the folder. Then she opened it. The documents were clear, written in plain English, with signatures and a structure that felt clean. A trust administrator, a set amount, rules, boundaries, no hidden trap. Loretta picked up the pen, then paused. She looked up at Daniel. If I sign this, Annie doesn't owe you anything. Daniel held her gaze. She owes me nothing. She already gave me something I can't buy. Loretta nodded once and signed. The pen scratched across paper. Small sound, big meaning. When she finished, Daniel slid another paper across. This is the employment assurance. Your manager has received a copy. If anyone at the restaurant retaliates, my legal team will intervene. Loretta's jaw tightened. They've been acting strange. Daniel nodded. People get nervous when they realize the powerful are watching. Loretta placed her hands flat on the table, feeling the cool wood beneath her palms. Mr. Whitmore, she said carefully. My granddaughter is a good child, but she's still a child. She doesn't need to be brave every day. Daniel's eyes softened. I agree. Loretta hesitated, then asked, what happens next? Daniel's expression returned to business for a moment, but there was something personal underneath it. Next, he said, we renegotiate the deal cleanly. We cooperate with federal investigators. And we make sure Ethan Cole and Marcus Klein face consequences. He paused. And we keep Annie out of the story. Loretta exhaled slowly. Thank you. Daniel nodded. I'll walk you out. As they stood, Loretta noticed a small framed photo on a shelf. Daniel, as a teenage boy beside a woman in a cleaning uniform. Both smiling, her arm around his shoulder. The photo wasn't staged. It looked like a real moment. Loretta pointed toward it gently. That's your mother. Daniel glanced at the photo, something soft moving behind his eyes. Yes, she looks proud, Loretta said. Daniel's voice lowered. She was. Even when she was tired, Loretta nodded. That's how we do. They walked toward the elevator. Denise smiled warmly at Loretta on the way out. Not like an employee smiling at a visitor, but like a woman recognizing another woman's hard road. When Loretta stepped into the elevator, Daniel said, Mrs. Johnson. Loretta turned. Yes. Daniel's voice was steady, sincere. Annie's courage matters. But your teaching matters just as much. Loretta held his gaze. Then she said the truth, simple and old as the church pews. Children do what they see, Loretta replied. I just tried to show her right. The elevator doors closed. On the ride down, Loretta clutched the signed folder against her chest. Not as a prize, as proof. Proof that for once, doing right didn't end with someone like her paying the full price alone. The second negotiation didn't happen in a restaurant. Daniel Whitmore refused to let the next signature sit under chandeliers and soft music, where charm could masquerade as clarity and people could pretend confusion was accidental. This one happened on a Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. in the Whitmore Tech headquarters boardroom. Glass walls, daylight, and a table so plain it made honesty feel unavoidable. The German delegation arrived on time. Klaus Reinhardt looked more cautious than he had the first night, less confident, less sure of what Daniel would tolerate now that the mask had been torn. Two new faces sat with Klaus, their legal counsel and a compliance officer. People who rarely showed up when everyone believed the deal was clean. Daniel noticed. He didn't comment. Rebecca Sloan sat to Daniel's right. Across from them sat a federal observer, quiet notebook open, not introducing himself, not interfering, just present, a reminder that the conversation mattered beyond profit. There was no Marcus Klein, no Ethan Cole, and that absence was its own statement. Daniel stood when the Germans entered, shook hands, then sat, his posture composed. "Gentlemen," Daniel began, voice steady, "we're here to complete what we started properly." Klaus gave a thin smile. "Mr. Whitmore, we regret the confusion." Rebecca's pen paused midair. Daniel didn't react with anger. He reacted with precision. "It wasn't confusion," Daniel said evenly. "It was misrepresentation." Klaus's eyes narrowed slightly. "We did not intend." Rebecca cut in, polite and firm. "Intent is a matter for investigators. Today is about terms." The room went still. Daniel slid a new contract packet across the table. English first, German second. Both versions bound together, page by page, with each clause numbered identically. "We prepared a revised agreement," Daniel said. "Mirrored language. No valuation adjustments buried in risk phrasing. No deferred voting control. No temporary oversight that becomes permanent through thresholds controlled by one party." Klaus opened the packet slowly, as if it might bite. Their legal counsel began reading, lips moving silently. Their compliance officer took notes. Daniel watched without impatience. Older men understood that patience wasn't weakness, it was discipline. After several minutes, Klaus looked up. "This differs significantly from the last version," Klaus said carefully. Rebecca's voice remained flat. "The last version was fraudulent." Klaus's jaw tightened. "That is a strong word." Daniel leaned forward slightly, hands folded. "It's an accurate one," he said. "If you want to deal with Whitmore Tech, you will have it on honest terms. If you want control disguised as partnership, you will not." Klaus held his gaze. The Federal Observer did not move. The sunlight outside the glass walls made everything look sharp and unforgiving. No shadows to hide in. The German counsel spoke, measured. "Your revised terms include a valuation increase of 12% compared to our original offer." Daniel nodded once. "Yes, because the original offer was based on legitimate risk assessment. We can negotiate risk. We won't negotiate deceit." Klaus tapped the packet with one finger. "And what assurances do we have that this process will not be disrupted again?" Rebecca answered before Daniel could. "We have independent translation verification on every clause. We have internal compliance oversight. And we have federal authorities already engaged due to prior misconduct." Klaus's eyes flicked to the Federal Observer, then back. Daniel added, "And we have my attention." A long silence stretched. Klaus finally said, "We will review these terms. Take your time." Daniel replied, "But understand, this is the only direction forward." Klaus's compliance officer whispered something in German to him. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he understood the shift. They were recalculating their posture. They had expected a CEO eager to patch embarrassment. They had not expected a CEO willing to walk away. Rebecca leaned toward Daniel slightly and murmured, low enough only he could hear, "They're checking, if you're bluffing." Daniel's answer was a whisper in return. "I'm not." An hour passed. Coffee was poured. Not fancy espresso. Just drip coffee in white cups, the kind corporate buildings served when they wanted business, not theater. At 10:18 a.m., Klaus looked up and closed the packet. "We agree," he said, voice tight. With one adjustment, Rebecca's eyes sharpened. "State it." Klaus cleared his throat. "We would like an extension on the closing timeline by 2 weeks. Rebecca glanced at Daniel. Daniel considered it. 2 weeks wasn't control, it was logistics. "Accepted," Daniel said. Klaus exhaled slowly, as if relieved and frustrated at the same time. Rebecca pushed forward the signature pages. This time, there were no secret languages at the bottom. No hidden clauses pretending to be footnotes. Everything was plain. And plain, Daniel had learned, was where truth lived. Daniel picked up the pen. For a moment, he thought of the first time how easily he'd almost signed, how close his company had come to being reshaped by someone else's greed. He thought of the phrase his mother used to say when bills piled high. "Don't let nobody rush you into your own ruin." Daniel signed. Klaus signed. Rebecca witnessed. The German counsel witnessed. The Federal Observer wrote a final note and closed his notebook. The room loosened slightly. People sat back. Shoulders dropped a fraction. The tension of a near loss replaced by the quiet relief of a clean outcome. Klaus extended his hand across the table. Daniel shook it. "Mr. Whitmore," Klaus said carefully, "your insistence on Clarity is admirable. Daniel held the handshake for one extra beat. It's necessary, he replied, especially when people assume you won't notice. Klaus's eyes flicked, as if he understood the deeper implication. Assumptions were the birthplace of exploitation. When the Germans left, Rebecca gathered the signed documents into a folder and let out a small breath, professional relief, not celebration. Daniel remained seated for a moment longer, staring at the empty chair where Marcus had once sat. Rebecca spoke softly. You saved the deal. Daniel's voice was quiet. No. We saved it from being stolen. Rebecca nodded. Daniel stood and walked to the window again. Midtown stretched out beneath the morning sun, bright and honest in a way cities rarely were up close. He thought of Loretta's kitchen, Annie's yellow ribbons, that little apartment where a child read books while adults tried to decide what truth was worth. Daniel spoke without turning, voice low. Make sure the Johnsons' trust paperwork is fully executed, he said. No delays. Rebecca's tone warmed slightly. It's already in motion. Daniel nodded. Good. He paused, then added, and check on Camila, the server. Rebecca's eyebrows lifted. You think the restaurant will retaliate? I don't think, Daniel said quietly. I know how people act when they're embarrassed. Rebecca nodded. I'll handle it. As she walked out, Daniel remained at the window, watching the city. The deal was signed. The fraud was exposed. Federal machinery was moving, but Daniel knew something older generations understood better than anyone. Consequences didn't always arrive in the order you wanted. Sometimes the paperwork finished first, and the healing came later. Loretta Mae Johnson returned to the Fulton Tower restaurant on Friday night because bills did not pause for bravery. She arrived at 6:10 p.m. in her navy work polo, hair wrapped neat, hands already smelling faintly of lemon cleaner from the supply closet downstairs. The city outside was dressed up for the weekend, heels clicking on sidewalks, laughter spilling out of ride shares. The familiar Atlanta glow of money moving through places that were never meant for everyone. Loretta moved through the service entrance like she always had. Quiet. Efficient. Invisible by design. Except tonight, invisibility didn't fit her the way it used to. At the employee lockers, Camila stood with her arms folded, eyes wide. They've been talking, Camila whispered the moment Loretta stepped close. Like you did something wrong. Loretta didn't ask who they were. She didn't need names. Gossip never wore a name tag. Camila's voice trembled. Gerald told me not to repeat hallway conversations again. Like I'm the problem. Loretta's jaw tightened. Did he write you up? Not yet, Camila said. But I can feel it coming. Loretta placed a steady hand on Camila's arm. She was older than Camila's mother might be. She carried that kind of authority. Listen, Loretta said quietly. You didn't do wrong. If they try to punish you for telling the truth, you let me know. Camila swallowed. What can you do? Loretta reached into her purse and pulled out a folded copy of Daniel Whitmore's employment assurance letter. She didn't wave it. She didn't threaten. She simply held it like a shield made of paper. I can do what I should have done years ago, Loretta said. I can stop shrinking. Camila stared at the letter as if it was a miracle. Loretta folded it back and tucked it away. Go do your job, Loretta said. Do it right. Let them choke on their own shame. Camila nodded, eyes wet. Loretta went to the supply closet, pulled out her cart, and began her shift. Mop bucket, disinfectant spray, cloths neatly folded, everything in its place. She cleaned the hallway outside the private dining suite first. That corridor looked the same as always, frosted glass doors, soft lighting, the faint scent of expensive perfume drifting in from the main floor. Loretta scrubbed the baseboards slowly, methodically, as if she could wipe away memory with the same care she wiped away scuffs. She couldn't, but she could keep moving. Halfway through the shift, Gerald Pittman approached. The manager's composure was back, his suit crisp, his smile practiced. Miss Johnson, he said, voice low. A word. Loretta didn't stop working. She wrung out her cloth, then looked up. Yes, Gerald. He cleared his throat. We've had concerns about professionalism. The other night, Loretta studied him. She had worked under men like Gerald her whole life, men who believed authority meant never admitting fear. Professionalism, Loretta repeated. Gerald nodded. It can't happen again. Guests' privacy is... Loretta interrupted gently. Gerald, I'm going to stop you right there. Gerald blinked, startled by the firmness in her voice. Loretta kept her tone calm, like a woman speaking from the pulpit. My granddaughter did not invade anyone's privacy, Loretta said. She told the truth about a fraud that was happening in your building. Gerald's mouth tightened. Miss Johnson. Loretta reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded letter again, holding it at waist level so only he could see. This is from Mr. Daniel Whitmore, she said quietly. He has assured my employment protection. He has also assured non-retaliation for any staff member who cooperated in a federal investigation. Gerald's face drained slightly. Loretta didn't smile. She didn't enjoy this. She simply stood her ground. If your concern is my professionalism, Loretta continued, then I'll remind you I've been cleaning here for years without complaint. If your concern is that truth makes wealthy people uncomfortable, then that's not my problem. Gerald swallowed. Loretta lowered the letter. I'm going back to work. She turned and continued wiping the glass door frame, her movements steady. Behind her, Gerald stood silent for a moment longer than necessary. Then he walked away. Loretta felt her chest tight, but not with fear this time, with something like relief. When her shift ended, she rode the service elevator down and stepped outside into the warm night air. Atlanta was loud. Cars drifted past. Music pulsed from somewhere down the block. The world carried on. Unbothered, Loretta stood under the building's shadow and took a slow breath. Her phone buzzed. A message from Denise. Everything is finalized. Annie's education trust is active. Also, Mr. Whitmore wanted you to know the restaurant has been formally notified. You and Camila are protected. Loretta stared at the message until the words settled into her bones. Protected. A rare gift. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Annie's school portal notification. Annie scored 100% on her spelling test. Loretta smiled, genuine and unguarded. She started walking toward her car, thinking about Annie at home with her books, likely insisting on staying awake until Loretta returned, because children did that when they'd tasted fear and didn't yet have the language for it. In the parking deck, Loretta paused beside her Buick and looked at her hands. Hands that had scrubbed floors for decades. Hands that had raised families. Hands that had trembled last week and still opened a door. She remembered something Reverend Bishop had said. Light hits dark things. Loretta understood now that light didn't always come from spotlights. Sometimes it came from a child's voice in a room full of power. Sometimes it came from a woman who had cleaned quietly for years and finally decided not to be quiet anymore. At home, Annie was waiting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, eyes heavy but determined. She sat up when Loretta walked in. "Grandma," Annie said, "did they say anything mean to you?" Loretta set her purse down and sat beside her. "Some people tried," Loretta admitted. "But it didn't work." Annie blinked sleepily. "Why not?" Loretta pulled Annie close and kissed the top of her head. "Because we're not alone," Loretta said. "And because we didn't do wrong." Annie's voice grew quiet. "Grandma, is the bad stuff over?" Loretta considered the question with the honesty older folks earned the hard way. "The worst part is over," she said. "But life always has something." Annie frowned. "That sounds scary." Loretta smiled softly. "It can be. But you know what makes it less scary?" Annie's eyelids fluttered. "What?" Loretta whispered the answer like a lullaby. "Having your people, having your faith, and having your truth." Annie's body relaxed. She leaned into Loretta's side, breath slowing. Loretta looked down at her granddaughter, 6 years old. Small as a sparrow, brave enough to stop a lie worth millions. Loretta thought of Daniel Whitmore signing a clean contract in a bright boardroom, refusing to hide behind comfort. Then she thought of her own kitchen table, where dignity lived in small decisions no one applauded. She held Annie a little tighter and looked toward the hallway where her mop and bucket sat, waiting for the next shift. Some people cleaned floors, some people cleaned corruption, and sometimes they were the same person. Loretta turned off the living room light and carried Annie to bed. Outside, Atlanta kept humming. Inside, the floor was clean, and so finally was Loretta's conscience. This story reminds us that integrity does not depend on age, status, or wealth. It depends on courage. A 6-year-old child, raised to value honesty, was willing to speak when powerful adults chose silence. Her voice exposed deception that could have cost millions, proving that truth often comes from the least expected places. The lesson is simple, but profound. Character is revealed in moments of pressure. When we choose honesty over comfort and responsibility over pride, we protect not only ourselves but the people who trust us. Justice does not always arrive loudly. It begins quietly, with someone brave enough to say, "This isn't right." This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.